Recording in progress.
Good morning, everyone. Bom dia a todos. Em nome da Luzo American Education Foundation, a Fundação Luso-Americana para o Desenvolvimento, bem-vindos ao que é o 45º Congresso da Luzo American Education Foundation, uma organização com mais de 50 anos de vida aqui no estado da Califórnia, dedicando, portanto, todos os seus esforços ao ensino e, particularmente, de uma forma muito especial, ao ensino da língua e cultura portuguesas aqui no estado da Califórnia e um pouco agora por toda a União Americana, uma vez que a Luzo American Education Foundation está presente em todos os estados com a família da Luzo Financial. Eu vou passar para o inglês, a nossa sessão vai ser bilingue, algumas apresentações em português e outras em inglês nesta sessão, para, portanto, sessão de abertura deste 45º Congresso. Pelo segundo ano consecutivo é organizado pelo Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, um Instituto Português Além Fronteiras, que tenho o privilégio de dirigir na Universidade Estadual da Califórnia, em Fresno. E, portanto, o ano passado também foi virtual, este ano também será virtual. Para o ano, se tudo correr da melhor forma, teremos uma versão diferente, em pessoa, com toda a certeza, presencial e ao mesmo tempo virtual, porque é uma forma de se chegar a outros patamares. Eu queria, portanto, mais uma vez, dar as boas-vindas àqueles que nos acompanham através aqui, portanto, do webinário e através das várias redes sociais. E agradecer ao nosso amigo João Manuel Dias, da Televisão Portuguesa da Califórnia, Diaspora Media Group, por também estar a transmitir através dos seus canais, portanto, o Congresso da Luzo American e esta cerimónia de abertura através da Televisão Portuguesa da Califórnia e do Diaspora Media Group de João Manuel Dias. Portanto, estamos em várias plataformas simultaneamente. Passando agora para inglês, welcome everyone. Those of you who didn't understand what I said in Portuguese, I will try to give you a brief summary. It's just a very, very welcome to each and every one of you, a very warm welcome to the 45th Annual Luzo American Education Foundation Conference. For 45 years, this conference has been held consecutively every single year. Last year, for the very first time, totally virtually. This year, again, virtually, hosted by the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, BBBI, from California State University, Fresno. I'm so excited to have each and every one of you, excuse me, here on the webinar. And thanks to all of you who are joining us through Facebook Live. Thanks to all of you who are joining us through the various other platforms, including Televisão Portuguesa da Califórnia, Portuguese Television in California, and the Diaspora Media Group of João Manuel Dias. Thanks for carrying the image and the sound in his various outlets. I'd like to start by, of course, welcoming our special guests that we have here for the opening ceremony, and to give each and every one of you a welcome on behalf of the Luzo American Education Foundation, our most awesome president, Bernice Pelicas.
Thank you, Denise. I'd like to also welcome everyone to this year's conference, and I would like to thank the administrators at Fresno State, the PPI Institute, and of course this year's chair, Denise Borges, and the many moderators and panelists at this year's conference. I would like to give a brief outline of the Luzo American Education Foundation and our programs and our mission. We were incorporated in 1963, and our mission is to lead initiatives for the advancement of the Portuguese culture and language, to support qualified students in assessing higher education, and to foster long life learning programs. And just a brief description of some of the programs, our major activities and programs. There's 5 of them that we do every year. And of course, our major one is sponsoring scholarships for youth and for the adults. And for example, this year, the Luzo American Fraternal and Luzo American Education Foundation together, we were able to award over $77,000 in scholarships and grants to 73 students. We also have a cultural summer camp, which began in 1998, and this is a week-long camp hosted at college campuses for students to learn about college life and also the Portuguese culture. Dia de Portugal, or Portuguese Day celebration in June of each year, where we recognize and honor individuals for their continuous dedication and to the Portuguese culture and community. And then, of course, we have the annual Luzo American Education Conference, focusing on the Portuguese language, literature, and culture. We also have an active fundraising program, and through a variety of different activities, we raise money every year to support the Education Foundation and the Scholarship Program. And that pretty much sums up what we do. I hope everyone had an opportunity to review the various scheduled panel discussions and presentations that will take this opportunity to participate in this year's conference. In closing, I would like to thank you all for taking the time out of your day to attend the various sessions, and I hope you have a successful and wonderful conference. Thank you again, Denise.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Bernice Pelikas, who has been president for now. This is, I believe, she's on her second year and has been doing a wonderful job. And we thank, obviously, the Luzo America always thanks its board of directors, from our president to those who sweep the floor, like myself, because it's always important to have everyone's input and everyone's giving of their free time, or not so much free time, to the foundation. It is obviously ran by many volunteers, and many of them are on the webinar and following us on Facebook. So again, thank you so much to President Bernice Pelikas. It is now my pleasure, and I will turn now to Portuguese. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you the Honorable Consul General of Portugal in San Francisco. Just recently took over, just recently began his tenure in the beautiful city of San Francisco. Pedro Bartolomeu Santos Matos Perestrelo Pinto nasceu 2 de dezembro de 1976 em Lisboa, licenciado em Relações Internacionais pela Universidade de Lusíada no ano de 1998, mestre em Gestão de Conflitos e Economia Internacional pela Johns Hopkins University e em Washington, D.C. Consultor no Banco Mundial no ano 2000, no núcleo para a presidência portuguesa da OCE 2001 a 2003, antigo assistente na Universidade de Lusíada entre os anos 2003 e 2005, adjunto no gabinete do Ministro dos Negócios Estrangeiros de 9 de fevereiro de 2004 a 27 de junho de 2005, aprovado no concurso de admissão aos lugares de adido de embaixada, aberto em 28 de junho de 2004, adido de embaixada na Secretaria de Estado em 28 de junho de 2005, adjunto no gabinete do Ministro dos Negócios Estrangeiros de 28 de junho de 2005 a 3 de julho de 2006, na Secretaria de Estado de 1 de agosto de 2006, terceiro secretário de Embaixada em 12 de setembro de 2007, na missão permanente junto das Nações Unidas em Nova Iorque, em 28 de setembro de 2009, segundo secretário de Embaixada em 12 de setembro de 2010, representante alternante no Conselho de Segurança da ONU em 1 de janeiro de 2011, adjunto do Ministro de Estado e dos Negócios Estrangeiros em 1 de outubro de 2011, primeiro secretário de Embaixada em 12 de setembro de 2012, chefe do gabinete do secretário de Estado dos Negócios Estrangeiros e da Cooperação de 24 de abril de 2013 a 26 de novembro do ano de 2015 e colocado na representação permanente de Portugal junto da União Europeia em Bruxelas desde 2016 até, obviamente, chegar a São Francisco há pouco mais de uma semana, sendo Cônsul-Geral de Portugal em São Francisco. Portanto, com muito gosto, Dr. Pedro Pinto.
Inês, muito obrigado pelo convite para participar. Uma coisa que eu devia ter feito logo era enviar-lhe uma versão mais curta do currículo para não estar a amassar os participantes com essa lista que julgo que terá sido a publicação em Diário da República. Sr. Vice-Presidente dos Açores, Madam President of the Luzo American Education Foundation, Mrs. Dean of Fresno State, Dinis, Honorary Consul of Portugal in Tulare. Minhas senhoras e meus senhores, muito obrigado pelo convite para participar nesta sessão. Por sugestão do Dinis, vou passar para inglês. So I'd like to thank you very much for the invitation. It means a lot to me to participate here in my 10th day in the West Coast. And actually, I'll start by recalling, for me, the first experience in California was actually related to the Portuguese language and culture. I was 16, it was the summer of '93, and I spent that very nice summer in the house of Jorge de Sena, and actually he had passed away already, of Messia de Sena. And so I take the occasion to pay tribute to him, who has done a lot for the Portuguese culture and language while he was working and promoting Portuguese in Santa Barbara. So almost 30 years after that experience, that was very important for me, my teenage years, I'm very enthused to be here as Consul General of Portugal. During these 10 days, I tried to hit the ground running, and apart from managing the consulate, I've been fortunate to have the opportunity to go to San Diego to attend the Cabrillo Festival. I've been to San Jose, where I met with the community, and in particular, I've visited the historical the Portuguese Museum, outstanding. And now I'm here in the Central Valley, today in Tulare, where last night I met with many members of the Portuguese community, and I thank Dinis again for organizing it. And later today I'll go to Turlock, where I will also meet the Portuguese community there. And obviously I've been already in contact with the members of our community in the Bay Area. And what I got from this first days, it's the sense of a very vibrant community, in particular from the islands and above all from the Azores, but also from Madeira and also from the continent. And it's a community that combines a strong sense of unity, a strong association spirit, fostering and promoting the Portuguese heritage in the West Coast. But at the same time, it has a very relevant cultural, economic, and political relevance. And here I underline the political, because unfortunately that's not always the case with our communities. And here, actually from exactly where I stand now, we have 3 congressmen elected in Washington. And if we want to promote Portugal in the United States, as a former Prime Minister said, Dinis reminded me yesterday, the best thing the Portuguese can do is to vote, to make their voices heard, and therefore they'll be able to better influence the political landscape in the United States, and therefore promote Portuguese interest. This integration that I've been able to witness, which I would say it's at almost a level of excellence, it does not surprise me. Fernando Pessoa has a phrase that I like very much, which is the Portuguese was never only Portuguese. It was always everything. And it's in our genes, in our culture, the ability to understand the other, to integrate, to generate empathy. And our Portuguese community here is a clear example of that. I would take the occasion to underline 2 points, which I would consider even challenges that we have ahead, where we have a margin of progression. One of them is the promotion of the Portuguese language at all levels, from almost kindergarten to higher education, and much has been done. The Instituto Camões has been doing a great job. We have 27 schools that have Portuguese in their program. We are reaching over 1,500 students, and Instituto Camões, other Portuguese institutions, also taking into account the work done by the Luzo American Foundation. Much has been done, but also much more can be done, and we are committed to promote the Portuguese language, which is one language with cultural diversity. And I underline this point because I believe there's work that can be done together with Brazil that represents a large chunk of the Portuguese speakers in the world. The second challenge I would underline is also the importance of connecting with the young Portuguese and Luso Americans in the West Coast. To make Portugal tangible to them, we must combine the traditional saudade, which is something that we are very proud of, with vontade, a will of the younger generations to relate to a contemporary Portugal, a Portugal that innovates, a Portugal that is green, a Portugal that is sustainable, a Portugal that is digital, a Portugal that has excellence in many sectors, be it from technology to sports. And for this, we might have to think sometimes out of the box and be a bit disruptive. In all this, the Portuguese consulate, our team, is deeply committed to. You can count on us, and we look forward to work with all of you to promote the interests of the Portuguese community, to promote the national interest of Portugal, and to promote the Portuguese culture and language. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Consul General, Dr. Pedro Pinto, for the encouraging words. Indeed, that is, you hit actually on the mission of this conference, which is, of course, the Portuguese diaspora in North America, in this case, the United States and Canada, a little bit more ambitious than normally we have done. But to include, and of course, the subtitle is exactly part of your speech, and we appreciate it, which is heritages, identities, because there are several identities, many identities. A Portuguese American does not have the same identity as someone who lives in Portugal or someone who lives in the Azores Islands, and of course outlooks, because our perspectives are all important, as you put eloquently, to bring us all together. So thank you so much. Passo de novo agora para a língua portuguesa para vos apresentar o Sr. Vice-Presidente do Governo da Região Autónoma dos Açores, que é o convidado para presidir a esta sessão inaugural do 45º Congresso da Luzo American Education Foundation, que, como disse, uma organização que começou estes congressos já há 45 anos e, aliás, na segunda parte do nosso programa desta manhã, vamos ter a presença do nosso amigo Eduardo Eusébio, que foi um dos fundadores do Congresso e também esteve, portanto, no âmago da Luso-América e fará, portanto, teremos uma conversa de cerca de 15 a 20 minutos sobre, precisamente, o Congresso. Queria também vos dizer que, portanto, a nossa sessão continua até por volta do meio-dia, mas, obviamente, que as pessoas vão saindo depois das suas apresentações para todos saberem esse pequeno detalhe. É com muito gosto que damos as boas-vindas à Califórnia, desta vez virtualmente. Já tivemos o prazer de dar as boas-vindas a nível, portanto, pessoalmente, porque aqui esteve há poucas semanas e a Califórnia já tem saudades do Sr. Vice-Presidente da Região Autónoma dos Açores. O Dr. Artur Manuel Leal de Lima nasceu em Santa Cruz, temos isso em comum, na Praia da Vitória, Ilha Terceira, a 23 de maio de 1963. Também nasci na mesma Santa Cruz, na mesma Praia da Vitória, só com uns aninhos mais cedo. É casado e pai de 2 filhas. É licenciado em Medicina Dentária pela Universidade de Porto, tem pós-graduado em Direito de Medicina pela Universidade de Coimbra, foi coordenador do Serviço de Saúde Oral do Centro de Saúde da cidade de Angra do Heroísmo, que é geminada com Tular, aqui na Califórnia, onde estou presentemente. E foi representante da Ordem dos Médicos Dentistas na região autónoma dos Açores e membro do Conselho Diretivo da Ordem dos Médicos Dentistas a partir de 2004 e até 2020. Foi presidente do grupo parlamentar do CDS, Centro Democrático Social, PP, Partido Popular, dos Açores desde 2008 a 2020, foi vereador na Câmara Municipal da Praia da Vitória de 2000 a 2001 e deputado na Assembleia Municipal também da cidade da Praia da Vitória de 2005 a 2009 naquele município. Foi vereador na Câmara Municipal de Angra do Heroísmo de 2009 a 2013 e deputado na Assembleia Municipal de Angra do Heroísmo de 2013 a 2016. A nível partidário, como eu disse, é presidente do Centro Democrático Social PP, Partido Popular, Açores, desde março de 2007. Foi vice-presidente da Comissão Política Nacional e da Comissão Executiva Nacional do CDS-PP, de 2009 a 2016 e é, desde 2020, vice-presidente da Comissão Política Nacional e da Comissão Executiva Nacional do CDS-PP. É vice-presidente do Governo da região autónoma dos Açores desde setembro de 2020. Tivemos o prazer de fazer um breve périplo de apenas 3 dias aqui pelo centro da Califórnia, onde o Sr. Vice-Presidente teve a oportunidade de conhecer uma parte da nossa comunidade. Aliás, quem vive nos Açores conhece sempre a comunidade, porque lá sempre há um primo. Não há açoriano nenhum que não tenha um primo na América. Portanto, um amigo da nossa comunidade, um amigo da Califórnia. É com muito gosto que temos a presidir esta sessão o Sr. Vice-Presidente do Governo da Região Autónoma dos Açores, Dr. Artur Lima. Bem-vindo.
Muito obrigado, meu caro Dinis Borges. Mais uma vez, é um prazer estar aqui convosco, embora virtualmente. Mandar-te um grande abraço em nome da Região Autónoma dos Açores e um cumprimento muito especial ao Sr. Cônsul-Geral de Portugal em São Francisco, Dr. Pedro Pinto. Também é um gosto agora virtualmente conhecê-lo e espero que em breve nos possamos encontrar para estreitarmos os nossos laços. And I would like to say hello to Bernice Pelicas. It is a pleasure to be with you today, and I hope you have a wonderful day of work, and it's a pleasure to be here with Dinis. I was with him a few weeks ago, and I was in California with our Dinis and visiting our community in the Fresno University, and with our ex-counsel Maria João Cardoso em São Francisco. Eu gostaria de fazer aqui um pequeno reparo, se me permitem, meu caro Dinis, que é o 45º Congresso da Luzo American Education Foundation coincide exatamente com os 45 anos da autonomia. Estamos também a comemorar o 45º aniversário da autonomia dos Açores. E, portanto, eu acho que é um sinal muito interessante, uma coincidência muito interessante, esse 45º Congresso com o 45º aniversário da região autónoma dos Açores. E, portanto, depois, permitam-me então que saúde ainda todos aqueles que, com o seu trabalho, contribuíram para a organização deste evento, designadamente o Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, com a colaboração do Azorian Diaspora Center. Bem-aja a todas as organizações presentes, bem como a todos os convidados. Este congresso, que se debruçará sobre várias temáticas no domínio dos patrimónios, das identidades e das perspectivas sobre a diáspora açoriana, é desde logo uma oportunidade única para sublinhar a importância da cultura, da língua portuguesa, das tradições e da história, para reforçar a aliança entre os Açores e as suas comunidades. Discutir formas de aproximação entre as várias gerações de açorianos que vivem em todo o mundo, em especial na América do Norte, de modo a sustentar a perspectiva universal do ser açoriano, é, a meu ver, um dos motos desta iniciativa a que o Governo Regional dos Açores se junta com todo o gosto. E por isso queria deixar também aqui, em nome do Sr. Presidente do Governo, um caloroso abraço, quer ao Dinis Borges, quer ao nosso cônsul e quer a todos os convidados e à comunidade toda que nos escuta e segue via internet. Minhas senhoras e meus senhores, sabemos que a dinâmica associativa e comunitária é muito ativa nas nossas comunidades. Já tive o prazer e o gosto de testemunhar isso. Permite manter vivo o espírito açoriano, independentemente do lugar onde se esteja. Sejam as nossas casas dos Açores, sejam as instituições sociais, educativas e culturais, todas as entidades onde os açorianos se envolvem têm uma palavra a dizer na construção da vasta comunidade portuguesa, açoriana, que não conhece fronteiras terrestres, nem conhece limites à sua... Um processo em contínuo aprofundamento a que o Governo Regional dos Açores está atento. Entendemos, aliás, que o caminho que se deve trilhar para que o nosso património e a nossa identidade e para que os açorianos de todo o mundo se possam unir ainda mais, está a ser percorrido através de eventos deste género e de iniciativas que o próprio Executivo Regional tem desenvolvido e conta a desenvolver em proximidade com a América do Norte e conto muito em breve também estar presencialmente, se tudo correr bem, aí convosco na Califórnia, também para um evento. Logo à partida, lembro que o Governo Regional tem mantido apoios em termos financeiros e logísticos a todas as instituições promotoras da solidariedade no mundo. É o que temos feito e é o que continuaremos a fazer. Para além disso, damos e daremos prioridade à divulgação cultural junto das nossas comunidades. É uma forma de manter viva as nossas tradições e de estimular a preservação da língua portuguesa. E prova disso foi a recente decisão da Vice-Presidência do Governo de distribuir pelas 16 casas dos Açores cerca de 300 exemplares de livros de temática açoriana. Estes são pequenos passos dados num caminho que não termina, mas que se expande no tempo e no espaço. No desempenho das minhas funções de Vice-Presidente do Governo dos Açores, deixo o meu compromisso de fazer para que o nosso património seja valorizado, a nossa identidade defendida, a nossa língua preservada e a nossa cultura sentida além fronteiras. Finalizo esta minha intervenção desejando que o associativismo açoriano na diáspora continue firme, esperando que se renovem iniciativas deste género, também das nossas comunidades, deixando um fraterno abraço a todos e um particular abraço ao meu conterrâneo, professor Dinis Borges, que muito tem contribuído para este espírito açoriano de nunca estar satisfeito, sempre inquieto, sempre em atividade, sempre dando nota que os Açores estão vivos onde quer que seja. E por isso mesmo também queria pedir licença a todos e a vossa compreensão, porque neste momento estou na Assembleia Legislativa Regional dos Açores e a qualquer momento posso ser chamado a intervir. Vim aqui para estar convosco, se tiver que sair peço que me desculpem e quero também deixar um abraço grande ao Sr. Cônsul, que conto em breve estar também consigo e conhecermos pessoalmente. A todos, um grande abraço e bom trabalho. Obrigado, Dinis, um grande abraço.
Muito obrigado, Sr.
Thank you,
Vice-Presidente.
Bernice, and a good day of work. And thank you for all you have been doing for Luzo American Education Foundation. Thank you.
And I think that Bernice actually met the Vice President at the event that we had at the PFSA head office. Did you not? I think you were there. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
And we have the group picture. Thank you. Muito obrigado ao Sr. Vice-Presidente do Governo Regional Autónomo dos Açores. Compreendemos muitíssimo bem que o processo legislativo tem que continuar e o Governo tem que dar resposta aos senhores deputados, como o senhor já o fez durante muitos anos, não é? Portanto, conheço bem esse processo dos dois lados da moeda. Mais uma vez, muito obrigado. Esperamos de facto que seja em breve, porque graças ao seu esforço, portanto, da sua equipa, acho que vamos ter boas notícias para a nossa comunidade com a colaboração do Governo da Região Autónoma dos Açores.
Obrigado.
Muito obrigado. E, portanto, vamos, e com a presença do Sr. Vice-Presidente do Governo da Região Autónoma dos Açores, damos por concluída esta sessão de abertura do 45º Congresso da Luzo American Education Foundation, que, como eu disse, foi presidida pelo Sr. Vice-Presidente Artur Lima, do Governo da Região Autónoma dos Açores, com a presença do Sr. Cônsul-Geral de Portugal em São Francisco, Dr. Pedro Pinto, com também a presença da Sra. Presidente da Luzo American Education Foundation, Bernice Palicas. Dentro, em breve, estaremos, portanto, eu sei que quer o Dr. Pedro Pinto, quer o Dr. Artur Lima terão de sair, pelas razões que explicaram nas suas apresentações. O Dr. Pedro Pinto precisa entrar em viagem para a próxima etapa do seu périplo de 2 dias pelo Vale de São Joaquim, e aqui também, através deste congresso, agradeço muito a sua presença, não só em Tolar ontem, mas também a sua presença em Fresno, na universidade. Já tive várias mensagens que foram gratificantes da parte dos meus colegas, da parte do Sr. Presidente da Universidade, que cumprimenta, quer o Dr. Pedro Pinto, que conheceu ontem, quer o Sr. Vice-Presidente Dr. Artur Lima, com quem esteve há umas semanas atrás. Portanto, nós estamos esperançosos que, de facto, através, neste caso, do Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, que está, portanto, e do Azorian Diaspora Center da Universidade, que está, portanto, a coordenar este evento da Luzo American Education Foundation, possamos ter novas fórmulas de continuarmos a fazer aquilo que já fazemos há 2 anos, mas aperfeiçoarmos em muitos outros aspectos, com, obviamente, a vossa colaboração. Portanto, quer o Sr. Consul-Geral, quer o Sr. Vice-Presidente vão ser em breve, mas eu agradecia a todos os outros que ficassem connosco. Mais uma vez, muito obrigado aos dois. Agradecia, portanto, a todos que permanecêssemos. Em breve vamos ter a presença aqui do nosso amigo Eduardo Eusébio para uma conversa. Mas, entretanto, como eu tinha-vos dito, 2 informações. Primeiro, aqueles que seguem o dito chat, não é? Podem ver que há o programa que está na página da Luzo American Education Foundation no site da internet, e lá está o programa completo com os horários todos. Há 1 ou 2 pequenas alterações em termos não de horários, mas de algumas participações, pessoas que por motivos de família não puderam estar nos painéis, algumas breves e substituições, mas na realidade o programa mantém-se, e assim aqueles que nos estão a seguir podem segui-lo. So, real quick in English, as we turn now to English, those of you who follow us here on the webinar, and if you do not follow us on the webinar, you can. Please do that, because you can just go to our website, the Luzo American Education Foundation website. There's a link there to the webinar. Very, very simple. Just Google Luzo American Education Foundation. As a friend of mine in the Azores likes to say, Dr. Google knows everything. So just Google Luzo American Education Foundation. It'll take you to the page. And there's a program that I've also put on the chat for you to have. And there's the link also that you can get on the webinar if you wish to be on the webinar instead of being like quite a few are on Facebook Live. I wanted to let you know that that is a possibility. We will have in a few minutes our good friend Eduardo Eusébio, who for many years was on the board and continues to be a strong supporter, of course, of Luzo American Education Foundation, and that is for our second part of our opening session, which will be a conversation about the Luzo American Education Foundation, the first 45 conferences. At 10 o'clock, we will have our keynote speech with the presence of author Catherine Vash. We're very, very happy to have Catherine on board as well, and for her accepting our invitation to be the keynote speaker. That will be at 10 o'clock. We'll also have here the presence of the Dean. The Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities. Our president could not be present this morning, so we will have the Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities to speak on behalf of Fresno State. Dean Nora Chapman will be with us also here on this opening first session. Then after that, and a little bit before 11, scheduled to begin at about 10:45 or so, we're going to have the presence of our very first panel. We're very excited about that very first panel that will be at 11 o'clock, called Today's Portugal and Today's Diaspora, Connecting Generations, Going Beyond Myths and Stereotypes. It will be a presentation by Gonçalo Souza, who is a student at the University of California in Santa Barbara, with a follow-up discussion with panelists Deborah Maccabi and Michael de Matos and José Luís de Silva. So that will be coming up at a little bit after 10:45 this morning. One of the things that we are going to try to do throughout the conference, to kind of give you a little bit of a break, those of you following us, is to have a little bit of our presence of those who are involved in the Portuguese American world as far as the arts are concerned. So we're going to be sharing with you a little bit of some music, and before our next presentation. So if you'd like to listen to it, we'd love to have, of course, you stick around, and we will be sharing the music of this very first segment. We're sharing the music of David Silveira Garcia, a very, very talented Portuguese American who has gone into the world of fado as well, and we will be sharing, of course, as I said, a little bit of his music right before we begin our next segment with Eduardo Eusébio. So let me do a little bit of work here to share this with you. Hopefully you'll be able to see it, and hopefully you'll be able to hear it as well. Someone can tell me on chat if you can see and hear. That's great, because it's always wonderful to do that. Here is David Silveira Garcia with his newest creation. Enjoy that as we prepare for the next segment to start in about 5 minutes.
Para amar, cantaste como quem come limões de amargura ao luar, com a voz que Deus te deu. Cantaste o nosso povo e a primavera acendeu no teu peito um fado novo. Foste guerreira e rainha e livre tal andorinha, foste do fado que amaste. Não foste mulher rendeira, mas fadista de primeira, e o povo cativaste. Lisboa, cidade do amor, nunca ela foi francesa, deste de beber à dor, numa casa portuguesa, na casa da Mariquinhas, alto com que voz cantavas, o fado das tamanquinhas, e a guitarra triste trinavas. Foste guerreira e rainha, e livre tal andorinha, foste o fado que amaste. Não foste mulher rendeira, mas fadista de primeira, e o povo cativaste. Foste mulher de verdade, uma voz sonora e forte, rainha da liberdade. Lutaste pela tua sorte, por teus livres pensamentos, rosários de penas cantaste, teu abandono em lamentos, e com lágrimas choraste. Foste guerreira e rainha, e livre tal andorinha, foste do fado que amaste. Não foste mulher rendeira, mas fadista de primeira, e o povo cativaste. Do nosso fado rainha, viajaste pelo mundo, com a saudade por vizinha e um coração vagabundo. Em barco negro partiste, rumo à luz da escuridão, mas a tua voz cingiste na palma da nossa mão. Foste guerreira e rainha, e livre tal andorinha, foste do fado que amaste. Não foste mulher rendeira, mas fadista de primeira, e o povo cativaste. Foste guerreira e rainha, e livre tal andorinha, foste do fado que amaste. Não foste mulher rendeira, mas fadista de primeira, e o povo cativaste.
The voice of David Silveira Garcia, the presentation. David, for those of you who do not know him, lives in the San Jose area, very active in the Portuguese American community for a very, very long time. And we are going to feature these different segments from different artists in the Portuguese American world as we have these change of different panels in order to give a little bit of a musical presence as well, and in order to actually talk a little bit and showcase the talent that we have, which is amazing in the Portuguese American community throughout North America. And we were very, very fortunate to have David Silveira Garcia. This fado, as all of you who understand Portuguese know, was dedicated to, we don't have to say much when we say Rainha. We know we're talking about Amália Rodrigues, who just, we are still commemorating her 100th birthday. And so now it'll be 100 plus 1. That's the way we'll look at things from now on. I do that all the time. I'm no longer 62. I'm just 60 plus 2. It sounds better to say 60. And so, and the same thing with Amália. We're basically in the 100 plus 1. Amália Rodrigues, a song that because of the centennial was created by David Garcia with Elder Carvalheira, who is, as you saw there, a very, very talented Portuguese guitar player, interprets that instrument with really as a master. We are going to actually have a little bit on a little bit of changes in our lineup. The conferences, for those of you who have ever organized one, know those things happen in live conferences in person, and they also happen online. Our good friend Eduardo Eusébio is not on, and I think he's been having some issues with technology. So we are going to, instead of having Eduardo Eusébio at this time, we're hoping that he can get those issues resolved, and we will have him a little bit later on. So we don't, so we're not here, of course, wasting everyone's time who is here, and those who are following us on Facebook Live as well. So I am going to start our keynote speech, and we're very, very happy, as we said, and as Bernice mentioned also, to have in the board of directors of Luzo American Education Foundation and our advisory board at the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute of Fresno State, is very happy to welcome I believe Eduardo Eusébio just got on, so we'll continue. See, that I should have said that earlier. Hallelujah.
Bom dia.
Eduardo Eusébio is on, and so if you forget the times, you can look beside Eduardo's head and you can see the Portuguese diaspora in North America, heritages, identities, and outlooks. So changing gears back to original, we are very, very happy to have with us Eduardo Eusébio, who is a Mr. Luzo all around, has been involved in the Luzo family probably, I would say, for at least 59 years, because he's 60. I think he started at 1. So he's been involved for 59 years, because he started when he was 1 year old. Anyway, he has been a staple, in the good sense of the word, at Luzo, both in the fraternal movement, in the Luzo Financial, and in the Luzo American Education Foundation. And Eduardo was invited on behalf, of course, of the organizing committee, myself and the PBBI and the board of directors as well, to talk a little bit and to have a conversation of about, we'll go on until about 10 o'clock, then we'll have our keynote, and if we have time, we'll continue with the second part of the conversation. Eduardo is retired, which means he has nothing to do except be here with us and give us information about the conference. And so Eduardo was basically one of the founding members of the conference. He was involved in it from the very get-go. He will talk a little bit about that, and he'll talk a little bit about what I'd like him to also mention is, first of all, how did the first conference came about? If you can give us that little bit of a history, I think it's very important. I think we're losing in the Portuguese American community a sense of history. Sometimes I deal with young people as far as my teaching career, even at Fresno State, and the students, sometimes think that things were just they came like they appeared out of nowhere. There was actually planning. There was and lots of work by lots of different people. We're all here on someone's shoulders. I think the sooner we realize that in our lives, whether we're 15 or 75, the better off we all are. And Eduardo was instrumental in the first conference, obviously, and instrumental in many others. So I'm going to ask him to give us a little bit of a history of the first conference, and then the transition to where for many years Eduardo was the chair. Basically, he worked with a local committee, but he is the one who basically led the foundation to work with the local communities and put together an array of conferences. I don't know how many, but he'll tell us of the 45. Eduardo Eusébio, pleasure.
Good morning, bon dia. Thank you, Denise, and sorry for this little delay. Technology this morning was a little difficult for me. And I will address the points that you just mentioned. Let's start with the conference, which was the first one in 1977. People start adding numbers. It says 77. How come this is the 45th? It was the 45th because 77 was the first. So do the math and you get there. So let me approach this from the point of the reasons for the conference and why did we have a conference to begin with. We could just have an annual together of friends in a place home, in a hotel with a nice room, and we'd be happy if we just got together once a year. But there was a lot more reasons for that. And to talk about the first conference, it involved a little bit of politics. In the 1967, the Bilingual Education Act came to being as Title VII, and it was part of the civil rights movement that was coming on at that time. Then another date of importance is 1974. In 1974, there was a decision of the Supreme Court, Lau versus Nichols, that basically told the San Francisco Unified School District that the limited English proficiency students were not getting the right education by not providing education in their own language. Now, why do I say this? Because this was all in a time frame, as you may say, you saw 67, 74, just before 77. So with that decision of Lau versus Nichols, and soon after that, in 1976, there was the California AB 1329, sponsored by then Pete Chacon and Moscone, the Chacon-Moscone Bilingual Act for California. Now that set the wheels in motion for Sacramento and the State Department of Education to provide instruction, preparation for teachers that were working with these bilingual students, whether they were Chinese, Portuguese, Spanish. So the State Department of Education had this task. How are we going to provide this forum, this way of bringing all of this new methodology to the classroom? What are the best practices that we have to put together? And there comes a name familiar to many of you, David Dolson. David Dolson, a good Portuguese American with roots in Flores and Santa Maria, who was then at the State Department of Education, in the bilingual department. It had just been formed. You see, the Chacon-Moscone bill passed in 1976. So they're a year preparation. At the same time, he was thinking, how are we going to do this for the Portuguese children? CABE, which is the California Bilingual Education, had just been formed about a year and a half before. And they decided, if we're going to address the needs of the Portuguese kids, we're going to do this with a Portuguese organization and not necessarily attached to CABE. So that's when the conversations with Sacramento began. And all right, we're open to do this. Also, people paid at that time, they had paid for the conference, and it was not cheap either. And the state was not in a position to receive monies and do those kinds of things. And the foundation was at the right place at the right time, and to be able to do that. So after negotiations, we said, okay, let's do this. Let's put this conference someplace. Well, where that someplace be? And the reason why San Diego probably is now apparent for those that know politics. Pete Chacon was from San Diego. And of course, we want to bring this right to his doorstep to show that he was right in providing education for the children that were limited English speakers, in particular Portuguese. And there was a Portuguese element, continues to be, in San Diego. So that's why we went to San Diego. was not all of a sudden we threw a coin in the air and go north, south, middle, and end up in San Diego. There was a reason for that. Now, Pete Chacon was a teacher in the 50s, and he was not happy at all with the way the limited English-speaking students were addressed in the classroom. They were relegated to the bottom of not to the bottom, well, at the bottom as well, but to the back of the class, put in special classes and what have you. And this was his way of trying to make his point, trying to make his these things well for the limited English-speaking students. And so the first conference was put together. We went to San Diego. And for those that are still the memory fresh, here's some of the names that went there to that conference. It was not necessarily everyone dealing with bilingual education, because our conference always it was multifaceted, not only just language acquisition, but as well as getting the community to talk to each other, have a student element, a young youth element, a community element. And just mention some names of the people that went to the first conference: George de Sena, Eduardo Mayon Diaz, David Olson, of course, John Vieira, Humberto Freitas, Rachel Cunha, Lynette De Rosa, myself, Joanne Malta Weingart, and many, many others. And let's not forget, we also had entertainment. And the Point Loma Strings, remember those that were in San Diego from years ago? They entertained us, as well as the people that the Portuguese American Dancers of San Diego. So right from the very first conference, we had this community element, this youth element, music, and having a good time. Now, at the same time, providing the kind of tools for the teachers to bring to the classroom. Now, I want to read something that particular to Denise, because we had the saying that, the best thing about the conference was, we said the hospitality room, you call it the hostility room. But there is a reason for that too, and that came from the very first conference. Because in the very first conference, and for those that may have the pamphlet of the conference, tiny little unprofessional thing done, well, it was professional, but it was done in the 1976, 77 mode, without really computers or iPhones or anything like that. But there was a caucus of the Portuguese Education Caucus, they call it, and it says this, and I'm going to read it, because from there, it gives us also an idea why we did what we did and what was done. And the caucus, which is on page 14 of the conference pamphlet, says this. Hopefully, well, this was the Portuguese, teachers getting together and community members. Hopefully, this conference will be but the first in a series of conferences to assist educators in implementing bilingual education programs for Portuguese Americans. The Portuguese Educators Caucus will be an opportunity for teachers, aides, administrators, and community representatives to discuss issues regarding the future of the Portuguese bilingual education. By the end of the caucus, it is hoped that the ad hoc committee of elected representatives will be formed to carry on the work initiated by this conference. This committee may associate with a bilingual professional organization or may remain independent. The direction taken will depend on those present. And I refer to this caucus because they said either we carry on independently and have this conference yearly or for as many years as we can do it, or we can go a professional one. And they were talking about CABE, for those that cannot read between the lines. And they said, no, we, and David Olson were very strong about that, as well as the other president. We have our own conference separate from CABE. As a matter of fact, we'll give CABE even more strength when they come to Sacramento and talk to the politicians about bilingual education, if you have not one, but two organizations that are fighting for bilingual education in the classroom.
Eduardo.
Yes, sir. I know the time is going by.
No, I'm just going to interrupt you for one. I think you gave a very wonderful presentation of the first conference, but I want us to continue, of course, talking about your experience organizing the conference. But we're going to do a little bit of a change here because of we have our dean of the College of Arts and Humanities, and we have our keynote speaker at 10 o'clock. So our goal will be to, of course, have our dean give some remarks, and then we'll have our keynote speaker, Catherine Vash, and then we will continue with the second part of the conversation with Eduardo Eusebio, because Eduardo's retired and he loves the conferences, so he'll be here 24/7. And just as a bit of information, I called it the hostility suite and not the hospitality suite, Eduardo, because at that time, if you recall, I was a journalist. And so I was working for the Portuguese press, and I was trying to get information out of you, and you were hostile. So that's why it was called the hostility suite at that time, and not the hospitality. You weren't very hospitable with the reporters, I must say,
Defending my territory. Now,
and so...
what would you like me to do? In about another 5-10 minutes, I'll get me done, because setting the first one and that caucus that gave, remember that, I'll say this. Then we have the meeting. We created, we appointed someone as the chairman of the conference. That happens to be me, and that's why I then carried on for 19 years, whatever. And that I don't want to get into a lot of the detail of the other ones, but you tell me what you want me to do.
Sure. No, I would like you to get into the details of that after our remarks from our dean and after the keynote speech, okay? Because we'll have some time between that and the next conference. So.
All right.
Thank you so much, Eduardo. Stick around. Don't go anywhere, please. We will continue with the opening session of the Luzo American Education Foundation. We're very honored to have Dr. Honora Chapman, who is an accomplished professor and administrator. And I'm going to read just a little bit from a story that was done when she was when she was chosen to be the Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities, which is the largest academic unit at Fresno State. We should mention that. Dean Chapman has been leading the college. First, she was interim dean. Before that, she was associate dean. And she had been associate dean for 3 years. Dean Chapman received her bachelor's degree and PhD in classics at Stanford University, and started her teaching career there as a lecturer in the classics from 1998 to 1999. I mean, she was, a child prodigy, because she couldn't have been more than 18 when she was doing this. She was a lecturer at the Santa Clara University in history, English, religious studies, and classics from 1999 to 2002. And she joined the Fresno State faculty in 2002 as an assistant professor of classics and humanities, and soon became the coordinator of classics in the Department of Modern and Classical Languages and Literatures. She also served as a director of Smithcamp Family Honors College for 5 years, which is a wonderful program at Fresno State. I invite you to learn a little bit more about that. And I could continue, because we have Dean Chapman is very, very accomplished. But we, of course, wanted to just give you a little bit of a brief intro. And we thank Dean Chapman for being here today, taking time. I know she's very busy. It's not an easy time for any university, especially Fresno State, as we have been kind of leading. As Dean Chapman said yesterday in our meeting with the Consul General of Portugal in San Francisco, our meet and greet, Fresno State has been leading in many different aspects in really pushing to get our students in person education, which is basically something that most of us, I should say, probably all of us, at least I can talk for myself, that's what we like to do, is be in the classroom. And Fresno State has been very, very bold with the leadership of our president, of course, Dr. Saul Jimenez Sandoval, and all of the deans, including, of course, the Dean Honora Chapman. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Dinesh. It is such an honor to greet all of you who are attending the Luzo American Education Foundation 45th Annual Conference, which is an accomplishment in and of itself. Dinesh has been the valiant director of PBBI through the pandemic, running more programming as one person than any other unit in the largest college on campus, if not the entire campus. He ran 50 separate programs last year, and we are so honored to kick off this year with this conference, with all of you present. Yesterday, at the library behind me, Madden Library, We met with Consul General Pinto for an hour, and it was such an honor to meet him and discuss his vision for the future relations between Fresno State and Portugal. We really celebrate the diaspora of the Portuguese people in our valley and in the United States. And we are honored to greet another great writer to our virtual campus. You see behind me the library. We have a reading room dedicated to U.S. Poet Laureate Philip Levine, who was a professor of English for decades. We also have another U.S. Poet Laureate, Juan Felipe Herrera, who has a laureate lab in our library as well. We are a campus of writers. Dinesh has started a new series with the press called Bruma, and we love writers at Fresno State. Consequently, we are honored to have as our keynote speaker this morning, Catherine Vaz, author of 2 novels and 2 story collections. And I just want to welcome you virtually to Fresno State. It's a beautiful day here. The sky is blue, and we hope it is with you too. Take care and enjoy the conference.
Thank you so much, Dean Chapman. Thank you. I know you have a limited schedule, so we know that you're going to be leaving soon. Thank you very much, and thank you for that nice introduction to Catherine Vaz, which we're going directly to her right now. And so give me just about a couple of seconds, and we will share Catherine Vaz. And again, I hope that some of you will tell me on chat if you can see it and hear it well. And I wanted to mention that what Professor Duarte Silva, Professor Emeritus from Stanford, has that in common, of course, with Dean Chapman. And Duarte had said that indeed he was also at the very first conference. Again, Duarte was also like Eduardo Eusebi. He was very young. I think Duarte was probably 14. And he was there with Joanne Malta Weingart, who's on also with us, and Eduardo Eusebi. I think they're the only 3 that were at the original conference 45 years ago here with us. So here we are now, as Dean Chapman introduced. We're going to, of course, have the presence and the keynote speech. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. I'm going to enjoy it because it had to be pre-recorded, and I enjoyed it tremendously. It was done live with Catherine Vaz.
Warm greetings to you all from New York City. It is a distinct honor to give the keynote address to launch the 45th Annual Congresso of the Luso American Education Foundation, hosted by the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute of California State University at Fresno. Special thanks to Luso American Education Foundation President Bernice Pelicas and Chairperson of the Board, Joseph Resenj, along with University President for Fresno State, Dr. Saul Jimenez Sandoval, and also Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities, Dr. Honora Chapman, also the Consul General of Portugal in San Francisco, Pedro Pinto, and Vice President of the Government of the Azores, Dr. Artur Lima. I am particularly grateful to Dinesh Borges of the Institute for asking me to speak with you. He is one of the most tireless creative supporters of our community, and I treasure our long friendship. This honor was last bestowed upon me over 20 years ago in Berkeley, and I have an abundance of saudade for that, because my father, August Mark Vaz, was present. He had given many such addresses himself as a distinguished historian and author about the Luso experience, who wrote The Portuguese in California, still considered a landmark book. Our speeches were, of course, live. It's important to note the peculiar circumstances gathering us together today. Thanks to the blessings of Zoom and computer screens, though with all attendant anxieties, at a time of global pandemic, something that drove every single one of us into a strange solitude with the irony of finding the whole planet there. It's appropriate to ask, Who are we supposed to be in this upheaval, this convulsion? What is education? What is the role of our cultural past and present as we look at a dizzying future? Let me tell you a story that seems fitting. Long ago, 2 of my cousins in the Azores moved to the San Francisco Bay Area and wrote continually and with increasing exasperation to convince their widowed mother to allow the remaining brother, the youngest, the one she adored, to join them. She was welcome too, but refused to leave her garden and the graveyard bones of her husband. She finally relented and let her 3rd son leave. But mere weeks after he arrived in California, he died, because this was during the flu epidemic of 1918. The horror story quickly slid into, how do we tell our mother? How do we answer her notes demanding to know why her beloved boy has not responded about how he's doing, and if he got the bolos Dona Amelia she sent? Here's what they did at first. They invented a life for him. They wrote to her about all the adventures he was having. The walks on the wharf of San Francisco, the fresh boiled crab, the excitement of being American, the new teaching job. Eventually, they wrote the truth because their mother deserved honesty. But as a writer, I was dazzled by how they elected to fill a blank space, because unexpected tragedy forced them to get out and discover life so they would have things to tell her. That is what authors look for, that place where imagination and invention are forced into a blank space, because it's where stories reside. When I wrote Heat Cannot Be Removed from Fire, based on these true events, I allowed the death of a brother to give the survivors an impetus toward fashioning their own destinies, if only to fill their own grieving hearts. My point today, I suppose the one takeaway I'll offer, is that so much of our world seems unpredictable that we're facing a call to embrace rather than fear the unknown, to seek what we don't know rather than adamantly insisting on answers. We live in a time of being asked to like or dislike everything, to rate it, a time of stubborn certainty, whether we're experts or not. We award 5 stars or none. We offer comments. It's all very loud. But true education, I want to suggest, is always about finding the further questions, letting go of being right in favor of the uncomfortable push past conclusions into whatever lies in that empty or blank space beyond every answer you find. Maybe it's time to add an I don't know option. I hasten to add that this attitude can inform all pursuits in the humanities, sciences, or business as much as it does writing. Success, but also wisdom, seem to involve a willingness to find peace and even an elegance in the discomfort of always seeking the next higher plane of not knowing. Finally, it's the best place to be as humans. Not to be right, but to keep ascending quietly toward a further mystery. I want to address what that means for the culture of our community. But first, I'll give you a helpful image from another story that a friend introduced me to decades ago by saying, Catherine, it'll tell you everything you need to know about being a writer, but also how to live. I didn't believe this until I read Isaac Denison's marvelous story called The Blank Page. And sure enough, my friend was right. The narrator of this ethereal, lyrical tale, it is fiction, describes a centuries-old tradition of the Portuguese royal family. When the daughters are married, they must cut out the section of their bed linens with the blood stains that prove their virginity. These are framed and hung in a hall of the castle, and visitors see roses, animals, and whatever they please in these blotches. But the framed linen before which everyone stands in the most awe, the one that reverberates in the recesses of all hearts, where the profoundest truths lodge, is completely pristine. Here, the blankness and silence suggest more passion, more betrayal, more rebellion, more possibilities, more anguish. Did the bride have another secret love forbidden to her now? Or did she reject her husband? Why? There's no way of knowing for sure. But whatever is true is strikingly dramatic. This is the best description I found for what creativity does. It disrupts our certainty by suggesting that many possible answers might lurk. Note that looking at that framed blank was not passive. A viewer actively engages his or her wildest imagination. Again, this was a made-up story, but it's about a sizable deep truth. As a child, I knew an Azorean immigrant named Mrs. Correa, a housekeeper to my godmother Clementina. Mrs. Correa could not read or write Portuguese or English, and she could not dial a phone because she reported that numbers looked like fish hooks on a beach. My father, out of nowhere, remarked, "I think she thinks in color." And he prepared a placard with 7 dots of tints alongside pictures, the police, the dairy, the hospital, our family, which corresponded to the blots of color he painted over the numerals on her phone dial. She could now telephone in color. This was the moment I became a writer, because to me the greatest metaphor ever was that we should find our own original, vivid language. But I'm ashamed to say that I was a sulky teenager, annoyed at being sent over with the key. Mrs. Correa was afraid to knock on her neighbor's door. This neighbor had phoned my dad to report that Mrs. Correa had been sitting in her yard quite a while. I was impatient, and yet I was being handed, out of the blue, and there's a color word, a gift and purpose that has lasted my lifetime. This seems so pertinent a cautionary tale to me now, that we do best when we wait upon and absorb what the world gives us, rather than us always telling the world what we think. It's a paradox that the older I get, the less I'm sure I know. Any willingness to travel down plenty of mistaken pathways is humbling. I can vouch for this based on my recent novel, my 6th book, taking over 15 years, with countless missteps. But it began by recognizing I was being handed a blank spot where a treasure was residing. I was invited to give a talk decades ago at the Library of Congress in the Hispanic Division, and I viewed an exhibit in the map division called the Portuguese Protestants of Illinois, which made me laugh first, and then piqued my fascination. In brief, a number of people in Madeira who had been converted to Presbyterianism were violently driven off the island and later adopted by Springfield and Jacksonville, Illinois, in the time of Lincoln. Someone named John Alves was raised in jail with his mother, who was condemned to die for heresy. But what caught my attention in a newspaper interview with him late in his life is that he made a pilgrimage from the West as an old man back to the Lincoln household. A playwright was also a visitor in the house, conversing with the owner. John had fallen in love with and courted a young Madeiran woman named Mary he'd met there. The Madeirans did odd jobs at times for the Lincolns. The playwright said something that caused John to speak up and correct him about the operation of the fireplaces back in Lincoln's era. The playwright insisted John give him a tour, and he took his arm and asked questions. When the farewell came, and they were about to sign the Lincoln Ledger, John reported that his hand was shaking so awfully to recall marry, and being in love that the playwright had to inscribe John's name for him. At the Lincoln Library, the people in charge were thrilled when I asked to get this ledger from the vault for me. We marveled that John had recalled the wording verbatim during this heightened emotional moment. But here's where the blank in his story occurred, the one I found in the newspaper article about John. After he joined the Union Army, apparently Mary and he, for unspecified reasons, lost track of one another, and he spent the rest of his life wandering. In his account, an entire year goes missing when he returned to Illinois after being wounded at Shiloh and traumatized in Vicksburg. She is not mentioned. So I thought, that's where the novel is. What happened? I like to think he responded, because one day I was ready to give up. I walked home from my office at the Radcliffe Institute, and waiting for me in my apartment building's foyer was a large packet about him from the Veterans Administration, one that I'd ordered, but had magically arrived much earlier than it should have. It contained his Army papers and a document about his terminal illness in a hospital when he typed out, "I have no one to take care of me." I told him, or rather his spirit, I would try my best to do that. Lots of uncanny things like that happened. A quick corollary to my main point today about finding questions more than answers, to pressing the I don't know button, to finding the blank space, is to tell students listening in that Google is a miracle and it's a boon, but the real discoveries happen when you go into the world and let it speak and surprise you. For instance, I was in Illinois doing research, and suddenly I was surrounded with this grotesque raining down of cicadas, so thick they were everywhere, getting crunched by feet. A biology professor I'd met there said it was time for their 13-year hatching. Of course, I put that in my novel. No way would I have found that on Google. And if I had, the feel of it and sound and look would have eluded me. I wandered into an old bookstore and found a pamphlet entitled 1849 Businessmen of Illinois. What a jackpot of names and funny asides about citizens, including Mr. A. Lincoln, attorney. James Joyce said that when we're in tune with creativity, the world itself will blow a piece of paper toward our feet with the word we're searching for. It's fitting that as we grow older and head toward the real unknown, we realize the point of living with grace is to stand humbled by mystery versus wanting everyone to admire how much we know. My book is in its finishing stages, and let's just say there are limits to how many 15-year projects I have left. But a full life, by definition, will leave a lot of things unfinished. I want to track back to suggesting some questions, more than answers, about who we are as Luso and Lusa Americans, culture and the future. I'm not alone in taking pride in our immigration stories, in our ceremonies, in our worldview that magic can speak as an ordinary occurrence. We honor the past, we preserve our ghosts. But what's ahead? How can we listen to blank spaces to find future answers involving baffling issues of identity? Gish Jen wrote a novel called Mona in the Promised Land about a Chinese-American young woman married to a Jewish man of Polish descent. It posed this very question, done with great humor but serious purpose. What does culture and ancestry mean to Mona if she and her immigrant mother's delving into being Chinese is limited to arguing if chopsticks can go in the dishwasher, now that they've, quote unquote, made it in the promised land? Mona is haunted by phantoms of ancestors growing increasingly faint. How do we preserve memories in a community, blending varied sensibilities into a unity? What happens when the mythologies of our predecessors are allowed to speak more to us than our present day anecdotes. How do we interact? What legacies do we create for our children? Good time to press the I don't know button, but I'll offer this. I teach the Writing the Luzo experience every summer at the Disquiet International Literary Conference in Lisboa. Correction, Summers Without a Global Pandemic. And what hits me heart center is a fierce love of Portuguese culture by attendees with little or no Lusitanian blood. There are many workshops for all genres and all disciplines, a huge mix of people, including Portuguese authors. In my class, students with Luso or Lusa roots come via Africa, Jamaica, India, Brazil, Canada, the United States. There's a sense of discovery, mutual reference points, and generosity of spirit among my students that enriches us. But we also notice how exuberantly the other Disquiet participants blend with the city and people of Lisboa too, and the love story that ensues. That can't be faked. An aside, Portugal's popularity does bring complex issues, in that the native residents are within all rights to be unhappy about invasions of people driving up prices and home values, even as restaurants echo with English. But I'm wondering if the future will be heart-based, pushing toward a sense of communion with others, united with cultural details or underpinnings. One of the Disquiet organizers, not Portuguese himself, had one of the most joyous weddings I've ever attended in Portuguese and English with friends from America and Lisboa, simply because the literature of the country and the friendships he forged make him feel like a cousin. Another friend, also without any Portuguese roots, found in fado music what he was seeking about how to tap into grief for his father, and his gratitude makes him love the whole country as his own invented heritage. That makes me proud about fado, but also because the best part of who we are involves such a welcoming embrace. In a stellar concrete example of this blend of preserving who we are while expanding it is Jose Batista in New York, who calls his business the Joey Bats Cafe. He dreamt up a pastéis de nata bakery with his mother, and he's a great example of going to the blank area of possibility to find his future, because he also creates pop-up venues, which are literally empty spaces. His business is a hit. He uses gold belly frozen delivery. In following his spark, he's found an ingenious way of combining our culture and cuisine with new methods and delivery systems, wide avenues. He posts wonderful photos of his mother and vó beaming. He hosts Brazilian dance nights, inviting exchanges of similarities and differences. Purists may not like that he has chocolate-flavored pastéis, but he's open to experimenting. And I must say, I'm always delighted to serve these at dinners in my home as a way of sharing cultural wonders. One friend from Singapore took the empty box home so she could order some herself. There are brilliant, as yet undiscovered ways of keeping our essence. Think of Azorean writer Vitorino Nemesio's declaration that the people of the islands are born with, quote, their bones dipped in seawater. It's celebrating who we are with one another, but also with the human family. I read recently something about the attendance at Portuguese traditional celebrations or dances being way down, what to do about that. I have fond memories of the Holy Ghost festivals and their capes. Joey Batista opened a door to everyone and said, welcome, here are a few traditional things for you to enjoy as you wish. Here's some of your music and ours, and maybe just some fun dance music for good measure. He's a great ambassador for us and offers a fine example of inclusive solutions. Simone Weil, which is spelled W-E-I-L, a mystic, political activist, philosopher, and author, wrote an essay I've always kept in the top drawer of my desk called Waiting on God. She wrote it to help students. It's about learning to wait in the discomfort of uncertainty rather than force answers. Here's what she says. Never is a genuine effort of the attention wasted. It always has an effect on the spiritual plane, and in consequence on the lower one of the intelligence, for all spiritual light lightens the mind. And she said, if we concentrate our attention on trying to solve a problem of geometry, and if at the end of an hour we are no nearer to doing so than at the beginning, we have nevertheless been making progress each minute in another more mysterious dimension. It is really light that is desired, and there must be pleasure and joy in the work. Willpower, the kind that makes us set our teeth, defeats the intelligence. We have to press on and loosen up alternately, just as we breathe in and out. Only in this waiting upon God does one find the soul, and in so doing, find the souls of others. This was instruction she offered to aid working classrooms, but it's a good way to act in this confounding and crowded and varied world for us all. I'll leave you with some advice along these lines from the great Fernando Pessoa, another Portuguese genius getting better known by the world at large. In a book entitled Always Astonished, he has a brief section called I'm Riding in a Trolley Car. These are Pessoa's words. That girl's dress I reduced to its material, the light embroidery that borders the part outlining the neck, separates itself from me into the silk thread with which it was embroidered, and the work to create it. And immediately there unfolds before me the factories and the workers. And I see the machines, the dressmakers. The whole world is unrolled before my eyes. I divine the loves, the soul secrets of all those who work, so that this woman in the electric trolley might wear around her mortal neck the sinuous banality of a swatch of dark green silk on less dark green material. I'm stupefied. The trolley benches carry me to distant regions, multiplying into industries, lives, realities, everything. I leave the trolley exhausted and somnambulant. I've lived an entire life. Thank you, Fernando Pessoa. What a happy moment when a student told me he posted a note with the words "always astonished" on his desk as his new anthem. True education is finally about finding more and more blank spaces, the unknown, and being creative in filling them. Out of that, something we did not expect can arise. Writer Catherine Mansfield once posited that we must prepare a garden patch and mulch and plant and pull weeds. But suddenly, one day can bloom the most glorious flower, and it stuns us because we didn't plant it. But we tended the ground into receptivity, and the world sent us a gift. It's good to be fierce about what we believe and what is true. There's a danger to refusing to push past that toward what we should be humbled by. Let's not be right, let's be amazed. Let's not be all-knowing, let's be awestruck. Find the blank space and silences and let them speak. As we consider for these coming sessions and days what patrimony and legacy mean in these times of shutting down and solitude, we can also stay eager for the magic of welcoming the bloom we didn't plant in the ground we dearly cared for. Follow the threads attached to others. Stay astonished. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you again, all of you, for this honor. Have a joyful, fruitful conference.
And that was Catherine Vaz, author, Portuguese-American author. I think all of you following here, thanks for the nice comments that all of you are posting on chat. I will make sure to share them with Catherine Vaz. I think you'll agree with me that it was indeed a wonderful speech. We're very, very fortunate that Catherine accepted our invitation, a long-time friendship that I've had with Catherine since the days of the symposium, Filaments of the Atlantic Heritage, that she attended several of these events. And I believe her words, and we will continue our conversation, of course, with Eduardo Eusébio, and then our next session will start at 10:45. But I wanted to just, I think her words about the garden patch are wonderful. I mean, and it's wonderful for the younger generations. Although you may have not planted it, but it's there, and take care of it. And that's actually fittingly with the theme that we will begin in about 15 minutes in our next session, which will be the last session for this morning, and then a bit of info, which is that we will have then a break. I actually do need a break, and I think all of you as well. We will have a break a little bit after 12 o'clock, and then we'll come back at 2 o'clock with a session in Portuguese. And that session in Portuguese will be called A Nossa Diáspora nos Estados Unidos e Canadá, Reflexão, Desafios e Oportunidades. We have 4 panelists, I should say 5 panelists. Nelly Pedro from Canada, Elsa Cardoso from Connecticut, Elidio Pereira from Florida, Zeto Carvalho from California, and Laurentino Esteves also from Canada. And then at 5 p.m. we have Intergenerational Connections, the Portuguese-American Experience in North America. That one will be in English at 5 p.m. with Sara Vieira from Canada, Linda Carvalho Cooley from California, Esmeralda Cabral from Vancouver, Canada, Matthew Correia from Canada, and Tisha Cardozo from California. So we have a wide variety of people from all over the United States and Canada. And now we're going to continue with a little bit the second part of the conversation with Eduardo Eusébio. So for those of you who were with us before Catherine's speech, he talked a little bit about the first conference, a very important groundwork that he laid there for those who don't know the history and how it began and the purpose of it. And then he ended it by saying that for about 2 decades after that, he was the leader of the PAC and working with local committees. And so Eduardo, tell us a little bit about that, because that's a unique thing that happened at Luzo. In other words, you were the conference sort of chairperson, but you had co-chairs that you had from different communities. So Luzo at the time had something that I've actually, those on the board know that I've been asking for, which is a statewide chair, like you were, that works with the local committees on an ongoing basis instead of just having chairs change every single year, which sometimes doesn't have the continuity that we would like it to have. But in the first 20 conferences that you did, basically you were the chair working with local committees, whether they be in Visalia, Hanford, Tulare, whether they be in the Northern Valley of Modesto, Turlock, in the San Jose area, in the East Bay, or in Southern California, right?
Yes, thank you, Denise, for that recapping what we talked about. I was mentioning the caucus that took place at the first conference. They gave us a decision to either go independent as a conference, not tied to any other conferences of the nature, and that did mention CABE was the big conference at the time. So they decided, okay, we're going to go and form our own conference. And basically they said within the Luzo American Education Foundation to sponsor and carry it on. At the time, I was the chairman of the education committee of the foundation and vice president, I think, if I can recall. And so by default, I suppose, they said, okay, be you. and working with the State Department of Education, David Olson in particular, and as you mentioned very well, with members of the communities where this conference will take place. As you may recall, Denise and many others, we used to go all over the state. Lately, we've been kind of confined to 2 or 3 different colleges or universities, San Diego, Fresno, Berkeley, San Jose. So we used to go to the community themselves, like Chinos, Sacramento, Turlock, which basically then we go to Modesto at the time that Turlock wasn't big enough when we first began these conferences to have hotel accommodations. We were not necessarily with the university. And of course, we had one with the high school, which was the one in Tulare just a few years ago, and that was the only one that I recall was hosted by a school district, and where you, Denise, were the chairman. So now, so we started these conferences, and interestingly enough, we gave the first 5 conferences the same name of the Conference on Portuguese Bilingual Education. But as some know or should know or whatever, the word bilingual education became kind of politicized a little bit. People weren't necessarily sure. There still continue to be doubts regarding this methodology, and however, all the research points out that it helped a lot of students. But we made a little tweak. We tweaked the conference, as we call it, Conference for Portuguese American Education, and since the 6th conference, that has been the title of the conference, Conference for Portuguese American Education, more branching, taking into consideration not just the bilingual education needs at the elementary school level, but all of the other elements and all of the objectives that we have for the conference, like reflecting the Portuguese community, connecting with young and old and communities and so forth. So it was more than just, continues to be, and was from the beginning, the conference more than just bilingual education, if you will. And then, of course, we've had always a lot of cooperation and aid and help from all of the Portuguese government, in particular the Azores. One time we had representatives from Madeira that I recall, but it was mostly the Azores and the continent. And of course, lately, and of course, we always had the congressmen, senators, assemblymen, and the politicians like to come to our conferences and bring their 2 cents worth to the discussion. Lately, we've had Vlad, in particular, who has been associated with the conference. Now, so fast forward to 1998. And in 1998, the politics became really, really very negative. And because that Proposition 227 changed the way the bilingual, the limited English proficient students would be taught. It required that in California, the language that could be used would be English and English only. And this practically eliminated bilingual education as we knew it until 1998. But the conference continued. Whether or not the politics got involved, changed things, our Portuguese community was here to stay, and will be here forever. Therefore, the conference will go on as long as we can. And as you did mention, I skipped over that. For the first 19 conferences, it was that connection, Luzo American Education Foundation, myself being the chairman, along with the State Department and the local people. The State Department finally kind of dropped off a little bit to the side because of the politics and being involved in one and not all of them, you know how that works. There was always, these rivalries within other groups of whether it was the Portuguese, the Koreans, the Spanish speaking. So they needed to kind of take a neutral position and not necessarily be involved directly. So we went on until 1998, and then in 2016, Proposition 58 passed. And that ended the bilingual education prohibition. So in 2016 forward, which was only 5 years ago, and to 2 or 3 years of pandemic, it's really been a very short time. There is no more limitations really on the use of native language or any other language. But there was a period of 18 years that this impacted the classrooms. By then, our community has also grown. You know this better than anyone. It is as far as the numbers of students, and the emphasis has become more on the development of the native language, Portuguese, classes in high schools and elementary schools, and that has continued. And we have brought up to the convention itself, and there's, from the conference, there were 2 offshoots. One of them was that the strategic plan for the teaching of Portuguese in California, that you are the master plan for that. Well, yeah, you were the man behind them.
No. Eduardo was me, and of course it was the master planner was actually just to rectify that. It was our good friend Duarte Silva, and I and Luzo Silva were of course involved, and you were involved as well.
But that was an offshoot of these conferences and inspiration. Another one was a little booklet that came out in 1990. Manual para os pais sobre educação na Califórnia. And you may remember that. You probably were part of it as well with others. And I was. And so that was for the first time, this was both in English and Portuguese. The parents had a little Bible on what to expect in the classroom, how to address, how to talk to teachers and administrators and so forth. So this is, now we're almost at the end of the year of my presentation, in that the conference has continued. We adopted the objectives instead of just a one phrase. For example, debate our cultural legacy and discuss the importance of preserving and preparation into the future. Organize workshops specifically targeting teachers of Portuguese language and culture, and so on and so forth. So here we are in the 45th conference with topics varied from literature to communities to last year we talked about the fraternal movement. I think we're going to do this year as well. We talked about the Philharmonicas, the Portuguese halls, the Holy Ghost, and all of that. And we are so lucky that we've had sponsors such as I mentioned a bit ago, FLAD, Rádio Portugal USA, the Portuguese government, of course, the Luzo American Financial, which has substantially helped this conference. But in a nutshell, what this conference was from the very beginning, continues to be, and probably in the future, is to inspire and encourage many to become teachers or school administrators and become role models in a classroom. And lucky for us, this effort has paid off. We began with very few teachers in 1976. This year, we can say we have many throughout California in the classrooms. And in particular, we have some now at the administrative level that can really make a difference. And this, with this, I conclude my little presentation of 45 years of conference. It could take about 45 hours, but did it in about 20 minutes.
It's not a Fidel Castro speech, Eduardo. That would be 45 hours. Remember, his speeches were like 40 hours plus. But you did a fine job as always in putting 45 years in about 20 minutes or so. And I appreciate that very much. I appreciate the history. I think it's important, and I think that we can build upon what you said and what Catherine Vash said to start the next session. But I wanted to also mention to everyone that indeed, it's been a labor of love for many in the Portuguese American world in California at this conference. And Eduardo is absolutely 100% right. He likes being right anyway, but he is. If he wasn't right, I would tell him, as he knows. But he is 100% right. The conference has really contributed, among other organizations and venues and instances, of having Portuguese Americans in education. We are really, I can tell you, and I will only mention the Valley because it's the area I know best, but the Valley indeed has changed immensely in the last 25 to 30 years as far as number of educators. Just in Tulare, the little city of Tulare with less than 70,000 people, we have over 35 Portuguese Americans who are teaching. Over 35, and that we could count in one hand, how many were in teaching over 30 years ago of Portuguese background. Just in Tulare, over 35. I have the list, and it's my list is probably not complete, and it's 37. And so, and also principals. We have like a couple of people in county administration, a couple of people in principals, and we have the superintendent of the high school district in Tulare is a Portuguese immigrant who came over at the age, I believe, Lucy Ferreira Van Sayok was either 8 or 9 when she came over. The same thing in Turlock. Turlock has administrators. Turlock has dozens and dozens of teachers in the Turlock and Hilmar area that are of Portuguese background, and I know that happens in the Bay Area and Southern California as well. And rightly so, the Luzo American Education Foundation and the conferences should take a little bit of credit for that.
I don't think I mentioned the Fresno State that the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute. It's already back here. I may have forgotten, so I want to make sure that this is mentioned.
No, that's
and
okay.
Everybody knows about it.
Thanks you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Inspire is the word of the day, and we hope we have done that. As you mentioned, we inspired a lot of people to be teachers. Maybe you were one of them, and maybe myself. So
that's true. That's true. Thank you so much, Eduardo Eusebio. Thank you, and thank you all for joining us. Thank you to continue joining us. Thanks to the students at the Portuguese 1B class at Fresno State who are now also part of our audience, and will be with us for a little bit. And thanks to, of course, all of you who are following us on social media. We have getting lots of nice comments from social media. We appreciate that very, very much. We are on Facebook Live, and we're in about 42 pages and 42 groups. And so you can follow us anywhere. And this is also being recorded and will be archived at the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute's special collections at the library, Portuguese American Collection, at the Henry Madden Library at Fresno State, and also through the Fresno State PBBI YouTube channel as well. So we're going to transition to our next panel, and it is a panel. We have some folks that you can see names on there, if you like, and we'll hopefully start seeing faces when they click their buttons. And to start it off, I think that I'd like to basically quote Catherine Vash when she said, "Let's not be right, let's be amazed." Indeed, there is no right or wrong about the Portuguese American community. And we're very excited about this presentation and panel. And I'm going to just ask actually our presenters and our panelists, our presenter and our panelists to introduce themselves. They can do a little bit better job than I can, starting with pronouncing names, because I mispronounced Deborah's last name. It's my Portuguese in me, the A's, I can't say A's. It's always an A, But thank you all for joining us, and on behalf of the Luzo American Education Foundation, and of course on behalf of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute at Fresno State. So we have Gonçalo Souza, we have Deborah McCabe, we have José Luís da Silva, and we have Michael de Matos. So we have recent from Portugal, in Gonçalo's case, what I mean recent a few years ago, who is a student at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And then we have educators, experienced educators from the secondary and university level in Deb, José Luís, and Michael. Michael coming to us from Hawaii, and Deb and José Luís here from California. So I'll start with Gonçalo, and we'll just go around from Gonçalo to Deb to José Luís to Michael. And if I can ask each and every one of you in about 2 to 3 minutes, it could take a little bit longer, obviously, but in 2 to 3 minutes, if you can introduce yourself to us, tell us a little bit about a brief bio about yourself and your connections to the Portuguese American world. So we'll start with Gonçalo.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here. My name is Gonçalo Souza. I am Portuguese from Portugal, as Denise was mentioning. I moved here to California just over 6 years ago. I was 14 at the time when I moved. I am now 20 years old. I'm studying at the University of California in Santa Barbara, double majoring with economics and accounting, but more importantly, I was able to get a Portuguese degree here, which I still find hilarious that I moved across the world to study the mother tongue. But it's been a great opportunity because not only did it let me find a small community here in Santa Barbara with my professors, my fellow students and mentors, but it also opened the doors for me to find the Portuguese American community that, in full honesty, being from Portugal, I had no idea it existed with such power and living it with this big Portuguese heart. So 2 to 3 minutes is a long time to introduce myself.
No,
I don't have that much to say about myself, besides that it is truly a pleasure to be here. And as a new member of the Portuguese American community, a fairly new member, I can see how much people here really live their own culture and their own heritage. And I'm excited to not only be a part of it in years to come, but to do my part to work on it and to build upon it as much as I can.
And we're excited to have you. Thank you so much. We got to know up to now just virtually Gonçalo through the California Portuguese American Coalition, because he was part of a leadership academy that PVBI and the coalition put together, funded by FLAD, Fundação Luzo Americana para o Desenvolvimento. And Gonçalo did a lot of homework, and that's what we're going to share to kick off the presentation. And I was fortunate enough to meet Gonçalo again virtually through, as he mentioned, Santa Barbara, and through Professor André Correia de Sá, a good friend, a leader in the Portuguese American community who will be making a difference in the Portuguese American studies in California. I just know that he's already making a difference, but he's only just begun. It will be a reference name, such as Jorge Sena and others as well. And from Gonçalo, we will go to Deb.
Hi, thanks for having me, Denise. Really excited to be here. A moment of clarification. My maiden name in this most recent generation is Martin, but my grandfather is Martins. My grandfather was from Fatera Faial. My grandmother was from São Martinho in Madeira. And so my father was first generation American. I grew up in San Leandro. And while San Leandro, 20 years before I was born, was given the title of the Portuguese capital of California, I didn't really realize how Portuguese I was until I was well grown. I marched in Holy Ghost parades, but I didn't march as a member of the Catholic community. There was a marching band with baton twirlers and such, which was one of the things I was. And we went to all of the festas, and I ate all of the sopas and did all of these things, but I saw it more as a school activity than as a Catholic community activity. My grandmother lived with us. She only spoke Portuguese, but my dad got teased a lot as a child when he started school and didn't know how to speak English, so he unfortunately didn't encourage us to learn Portuguese. So my Portuguese language learning began in Denisha's class at College of the Sequoias a year ago. And I got to be a student who attended many of these kinds of lectures that Denise was doing and have really appreciated that. I didn't realize until I started doing genealogy that I was surrounded by Portuguese people growing up. I mean, there were Azeveiros, there were Pereiras, there were Fonsecas, there were Silveiras, etc. And I didn't know it was unusual for a public school system to let kids out of school early on Fridays to go to Stations of the Cross during Lent. I mean, I just thought that's what every school did. So when I got really interested in the Portuguese language and in my Portuguese heritage, I realized I'd always been Portuguese American. I just didn't identify because I didn't know any better. And so I feel really honored to be a part of this group, to attend the various events, looking forward to be able to go to things in person. I did attend a Luso American conference at San Jose State probably a decade ago, and that was awesome. And so, eager to hear what my colleagues here on the panel have to say, because I think it is important that we continue to build a foundation for the younger people to embrace their culture, because there's so much that the Portuguese culture has to offer.
Indeed, and professionally, tell us a little bit about your professional curriculum.
I was an academic for 44 years before I retired. I started out with a master's degree and taught in the College of Business. And when my younger child was 18, we joke that she graduated from high school and mom and dad went away to college, because that's when I went back to get my PhD. So once I had a PhD, I could stop being the adjunct who kept filling in the slots and actually have a tenure track position. I worked at the University of Arizona. My husband was working at the Arizona State, and so we did a commuter marriage for 3 years, and then eventually said, whoever can get to the other person's school the fastest, we'll do that. And so I went to ASU. I then, after 10 years of doing that, we came home to be closer to our children, and I worked at a small private college in Silicon Valley, and worked there teaching marketing, which is what my specialty in business was, and did that until the very end of my career, when I dabbled as the Dean of Academic Affairs and the Dean of the College of Business. But like teaching a whole lot more than being a dean. So that's a great experience.
Indeed, thank you so much. A wonderful and glorious career. Thank you for and if I ever mispronounce McKibb again, I can always go back to Martins. I know how to pronounce that one pretty well. Thank you so much, Deb. José Luís da Silva.
Hi, hello everybody. Olá a todos, Denise. Prazer estar aqui. Olha, hoje eu vim sem gravata para destoar, não é? I'm the rebel in the group for that, because it's a panel about connected generations, so I would not show up at the time. All kidding aside, what can I say about myself? I'm a retired teacher. I was born in San Miguel, where I finished my high school education, came to America. I majored in Portuguese, Spanish, and French. Got a master's in French and master's in Spanish. And I spent most of my teaching career at San Jose High. I was in a couple of other schools, but 20-some years teaching Portuguese and some Spanish and some French. There, I also, for a while, was the coordinator of the International Baccalaureate program at our school. So I've been retired for a while. And I've been cooperating with educational things, a lot of things with these, because he's a great person to work with. He's a loyal co-worker. He's actually not a co-worker, he's the leader. And I follow. So in the community, I've been involved in a few things. In the Luzo American Education Foundation specifically, because as I've mentioned many times, I owe something to the Luzo American Education Foundation, because in 1974 I was given grant by the foundation to study in the summer at the University of Lisbon, and that was essential for my special major that I was doing in Portuguese at Cal State Hayward. And so years later, I came back to the board by invitation of Joanne Alta and other people from the board, and I've been president of the foundation. I've been chair, right now, co-chair of the board, so I'm enjoying doing that. So that's basically me.
Indeed, and Luís forgot to mention that he is also a published author with wonderful poets with a book, O Cântico do Silêncio. And from José Luís, we will go to Michael.
Thank you, Denise. It's so nice to be here. My name is Mike Dimatus. I'm a little shocked to be on this panel, quite honestly. I've come to my Portuguese heritage quite late in life. I'm fourth generation. Denise is right. I born and raised in Hawaii. My great-grandparents were from Madeira, from the Azores, San Miguel, and I was always, both sides of my family from insular Portugal, I've always been embedded in a Portuguese culture, but I was a little bit a fish that didn't know it was wet, which is interesting for me. About 8 years ago, I should tell you that I'm a professor. I teach at the University of Hawaii in the School of Social Work. I'm the chair of the bachelor's program there. I've spent most of my professional career working with runaway and homeless youth and trying to figure out how to help them get their needs met and families get their needs met. And it's been an unbelievable career. That being said, I was teaching a class one day, it was about 8 years ago, and a student came up to me after the first day of class and said, Dimatus, Italian? And I looked quizzically at the student and I said, hey, where are you from? Not accusatory and nothing against Italians, but Hawaii doesn't have a long-standing history of Italian presence. Now, to be fair, the university is incredibly diverse, and most people who teach at the university are, in fact, not necessarily from Hawaii, but Hawaii has a strong Portuguese heritage. And I was shocked that the student didn't recognize the name, because when I was growing up, we identified each other racially, ethnically, etc., because we were part of a plantation people. And so when I asked the student, I don't even remember what the student answered, but even as I was asking the question, I asked myself, do I know that I'm Portuguese? And that started a process of research, exploring Portuguese identity formation in Hawaii that I've been engaged in now for quite some time. And in fact, that led me to Dinesh. And I'm here. I feel a little bit like I owe the Portuguese community, but I also feel that maybe robbed is too strong, but I've missed opportunities to fully engage with my Portuguese identity and with Portuguese people as a people, not just as a local individual or local groups living in Hawaii. And so here I am, honored to be here, just thrilled.
We're the ones that are thrilled to have you on, Michael. Thank you so much for taking time. And so we'll start with Gonçalo. Gonçalo will be making a presentation first. This presentation was, as I said, part of the homework that Gonçalo took on very serious, and we're glad he did, during the California Portuguese American Coalition and PBBI Leadership Academy, Young Portuguese American Leadership Academy. The academy happened in the beginning of August. It was a 3-day event with lots of different guest speakers, and the attendees were also asked to give their thoughts and to contemplate on what's the information and the Portuguese American presence. And Gonçalo went, he's an exemplary student, one of those that those in the classroom would like to have, which is when they take an assignment and they create with it. And so he created this document that he was nice enough to share with me and to share with the members of the panel. And so I'll switch it over to Gonçalo, and he'll tell us a little bit about his thought process and this document.
Thank you, Denise, for the introduction. Yeah, I remember in the beginning of the Leadership Academy, you issued this non-mandatory homework, but it did resonate with me, and it was the question that you threw out in the beginning of our seminar, which was, how do we reach people? How can we get more people involved in the community? And I dwelled on it over the 3 days, and at the end, I ended up coming up with this, because the big problem is that we are trying to reach Portuguese Americans, but it's impossible to get to just them because there's no list, there's no directory, and furthermore, we are trying to appeal to younger generations in second, third, fourth, fifth generation sometimes that have completely lost touch with modern day Portuguese culture, and perhaps even the Portuguese American community. They might not even be members of that anymore because they've moved away from the cities they were raised. They're spread out all across the United States. So at this point, these people are just Americans. So if we're trying to reach people, we need to appeal to just Americans, because it's very different to have somebody say, I am 50% German and I am 10% Danish, or have someone assume that identity and say, I am German American. Well, that is, I think, what we hope in an identity feeling, that we can create that identity feeling in the Portuguese American community. Now, although this is a very current topic, of course we are debating it right now because it is important, it's not a new struggle. In the 1940s, we had already people in the APPB, the Associação Portuguesa Protetora e Beneficente. They were already saying that provisions would have to be made for the modern Luso-American if the young generations were not to be lost. August Mark Vaz has a wonderful book, Portuguese in California, and he talks exactly about making the young Luso-Americans regain that sense of heritage that has been lost. We can go even back 20 more years. In the 1920s, in the same book, Vaz writes that it was a time of rapid change, but of reevaluation. The young generations were already being lost then. At the time, we had something different, which was continuous waves of emigration from Portugal and the islands. Now, not so much, so we are losing that direct contact. But I haven't answered the question yet, which is, how do we reach these people then? And I propose selling the idea of Portugal as the all-inclusive state. And I mean this on all regards, because the Portuguese are so diverse. They are all over the world, quite literally. We have Portuguese-speaking territories and countries in every continent, immigrants everywhere. It is a worldwide community. And we can look at Portugal's stance on current debates in the socio-political sphere. We have LGBTQ plus rights. Portugal is one of the few countries in the world that contains a ban on discrimination based on sexual orientation written into its constitution. If we look at the issue of drugs, in 2001, Portugal was facing a dangerous heroin epidemic and decriminalized all drugs trying to fix it. It had great success, and it is now being mirrored in Oregon. Even California is now looking to implement some of the same measures. We look at debates on race and ethnicity that are happening very currently here in the United States. We look at what a Portuguese person is, and we can't describe them. Much like we can't describe what an American person looks like, because we have all of these people from all over the world combining in this one state. There is no standard Portuguese look, and there can't be. So to be Portuguese is not to be from a certain place. It is rather a state of mind. Because if we say it is being from within the borders of that little rectangle at the edge of Europe, or these islands sprinkled across the Atlantic, we are completely missing the point of what it truly is to be Portuguese. We are overlooking millions of people all across the world. Now, we must also address that these people don't have the same relationship to Portugal and its symbols that I do. They can't have. If I see a Portuguese flag on the street, or if I see somebody with a Portugal jersey with Ronaldo written on the back, I'm going to go up to them, tap them on the shoulder, and try to talk to them, because that viscerally brings something out in me. If I hear somebody speak Portuguese on the street, I'm going to say hello. I'm going to go talk to them. The people that we are talking about, these Portuguese Americans, now only Americans, they might not know what the Portuguese flag looks like. They might have completely lost the language. So it can't be through these typical channels that we appeal again. So that is the answer for me. Don't appeal via the normal channels. appeal via this state of mind. To be Portuguese is then to share these values of inclusion and open-mindedness towards the world. Now, I'm a huge fan of quotes, so I always write a few quotes in everything that I do. I have two in particular that I would like to share. We had Catherine Vash sharing a little bit about Fernando Pessoa. I also have a great quote by Fernando Pessoa. Nunca me sinto tão portuguesmente eu como quando me sinto diferente de mim. Never do I feel so Portuguese like myself. When do I feel different from myself? Agostinho da Silva, another idol for me. A questão portuguesa não é de se falar ou não falar português. É de ser ou não ser à maneira portuguesa. Que é ser variadíssimas coisas ao mesmo tempo e por vezes coisas que parecem contraditórias. So the Portuguese question is not to speak or not speak Portuguese. It's to be or not to be the Portuguese way, which is being a multitude of things at the same time. Many times, things that seem contradictory. So I have answered half of the question, which is how do we reach these people on a moral and intellectual level? How do we reach them physically? Well, then we need to, that's the debate that I think we need to ensue. But it's making events, music festivals, set up food stands, stand-up comedy. But the important thing that I want to underline is that these can't be for Portuguese Americans. These need to be for Americans that are intellectually Portuguese. And coming back to Fernando Pessoa, he talks about two great states, the ancient Greece and the future Portugal. Everyone is welcome in this state because it's not a physical one, it's a state of mind. And that's, I think, the basis that we need to build upon to bring all these people into the community, the new community, perhaps.
Indeed, and I would like to start a conversation with our panel, and those of you on the webinar, and even if you're on Facebook Live, I'll try to keep an eye on that as well. But if those of you on the webinar have any questions or any comments or any suggestions that you would like to put forth to Gonçalo and the panel, please do so. The idea of the all-inclusive state, the idea of I know that's something that in a way Michael has worked in his own work, but with the work he's done through his teaching in social work. So and I'd like to start with Michael because exactly he also mentioned that he kind of is full-blooded, let's put it that way, Portuguese as people say, but has been distant from the language and the culture because of being, that very normal of being third and fourth generation. And so it just happens, and that's what Gonçalo was basically saying, how do we reach those who aren't Portuguese Americans? They really are Americans of whatever ethnicity, and in some cases it may only be 10% Portuguese or 20% Portuguese. It's so, Michael, any thoughts on? I know that you've had a chance to look at Gonçalo's thoughts on paper. Any thoughts that you'd like to add, or questions, or suggestions, or we'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Dinesh, and thank you, Gonçalo. So insightful. And you're right, Dinesh. I don't think of myself as a Portuguese American. I think of myself as an American of Portuguese ancestry. And the reason I want to be careful of appropriating an identity that for so many is so close and so tight to who they are. Those who come from Portugal or come from the insular islands or insular Portugal or come from one of the many Portuguese locations across the globe. As I was listening, as I was thinking about this, my wife actually is probably more representative of what it is to be Portuguese in Hawaii than I am. Like you said, I'm essentially pure Portuguese. I don't find any other nationality or ethnic identity when I trace back my heritage. My wife, on the other hand, is Portuguese, Hawaiian, and Japanese, and she's mixed. And she identifies, when she was growing up, she identified very strongly with her Portuguese identity, her father being Portuguese, and she was very clear on that identity. And as she aged, she began to embrace her other identities, including, and most especially, her Hawaiian identity. Here in the islands, Hawaiians were systematically marginalized. And so reconnecting with that identity was incredibly important. what's interesting about this, and so there's another piece here, is I do a seminar every year for Native Hawaiian students, working with the Native Hawaiian community to help them bring their Native Hawaiian identity to their professional identity, to bring it to bear, that those racial, ethnic, cultural realities are valid and valuable to being a helper. What's interesting is, as we've worked with these Native Hawaiian students, most are of mixed heritage. And as they embrace their Hawaiian identity and heritage, they begin to embrace their other heritages. They begin to embrace their other identities. And this got me thinking of what Gonçalo is saying, in that when we think about how to approach and get people engaged with their identity, it can't be solely on a notion of where you're from or where you speak the language. It has to be broader than that. It has to be almost something internal, a feeling that gets awakened, that gets a spark that gets lit, that in addition to these other identities they may have, and in Hawaii we have an incredible assortment, including what many of us label as a local identity made up of those who have histories on the plantation, that if we can invite them to embrace these multiple identities and include that Portuguese identity, maybe as, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Gonçalo, but as this state of mind about what it is to be Portuguese, what it is to feel Portuguese, I think that's one of the things that we need to do. And I also am concerned, I'd be concerned if we tried to approach Portugueseness in isolation. In some place like Hawaii, that would never work. It would never fly. We have Portuguese community centers, we have Portuguese festivals, and there's turnout, but the turnout isn't widespread and it isn't necessarily as cross-generational as we'd like. I think if we can be included and inclusive of other identities, and Gonçalo mentioned the LGBTQ community, mentioned some of the progressive stances that Portugal has taken, that these are things that we can take pride in and can inform our Portuguese identities. And so I really believe that there has to be some capacity to be inclusive. We want to invite people to embrace that Portuguese identity because many of us have extended histories and heritages.
Indeed. Gonçalo, any thoughts to what Michael was saying?
That's exactly the right line of thinking in my view as well. Nobody is anything in a vacuum. The same way that I am no longer just Portuguese after 6 years in the United States and 6 years in California. I am something else. If we want to put a term on it, it could be Luzo American or Portuguese American. But identities shape us, and we can never just be one solid thing. We are a multitude of experiences that shape who we become, and accepting all of those is the best. And researching and diving deep into all of those is the best way to connect with each of them. So I'm right there with you, Michael. Then maybe it's this attempt, and then to connect cultures and connect heritages that we might need to do as an entire community, to look at our neighboring communities and see, okay, what do we have in common? Because there surely be people that we should. I want to be careful with the words that I say, but there's surely that maybe people that share both identities and communities. So maybe we can approach those values together, and as two separate communities coming together for whatever, for an event, for
Indeed. Deb, your thoughts?
Well, I guess the marketer in me would like to go around the back door on this one. I think in some of the sessions I heard in the past times, Denise, that I joined in on things, and then some young people I've talked to, folks who participate in the traditional events feel like that's one part of their culture, but then there's this whole rest of their world as Americans. And I think rather than trying specifically to focus on young Portuguese Americans, we need to focus on young people. And sort of subtly, in a stealth sort of way, reach them where they live and make being Portuguese be really cool. So the things that Gonzalo was talking about are things that the millennials and the Gen Xers care about. They care about sustainability. They care about human rights. They care about diversity. They would welcome knowing more about, wow, there's this country that believes in the things we were talking about. When Catherine talked, she talked about going to the blank spaces of possibilities, and I think blending what is good about Portugal with what young people are interested in. So if we look at millennials and Gen Xers, which is basically 1980 on for those two groups, we're looking at people who seek experiences. I mean, you go to any thrift store and you'll see all grandma's china and silver because they don't want things, they want experiences. Well, my experience going to mainland Portugal and Madeira and to the Azores was, you talk about an experience. I mean, wow, what a beautiful, beautiful place. And so unique. Ecotourism, talk to them about that. Talking about the sustainability aspects of what's going on in the country. Looking at recognizing that this is the most educated generation there's been. And so they really do like to learn, not necessarily in a traditional classroom setting with a talking head, like me, but rather from one another. So I think in-person events like food events or music events that Gonzalo mentioned, number one on Gen Xers list is music. And number one on millennials is food. They're a foodie culture. Well, introduce them to a variety of ethnic foods, including Portuguese food. I know lots of people who go to Greek festivals, for example, but I don't ever hear anybody talking about going to a Portuguese festival who isn't already Portuguese and familiar with it. And then I think as we find activities that appeal to them, figure out ways to reach them. They are not a great in-person group. They're digital nomads. They just move from Instagram to TikTok to Snapchat to Twitter. I would venture that most of us are on Facebook, and that's kind of where they go back to talk to their older relatives. So I would say things that can be posted so that they can share it with one another. Have a place where this food festival that they go to or music festival that they go to, they can talk to their friends about how great it was. They love celebrity. So some of us who are on the panel who are older might recognize names like David Lee Roth from Van Halen, or Joe Perry from Aerosmith, or Tom Hanks, or Keanu Reeves, all Portuguese Americans. These kids probably recognize Katy Perry and Deb, who's a woman rapper, and Ronnie Radke, who's a kind of a I don't want to use the wrong name for the genre of music that he does, but I know my great nieces listen to him all the time. All Portuguese Americans. If any of you watch NCIS, like the Kinsey character on NCIS, she's Portuguese American. There are all these little things we could do on social media to let them know that they're not isolated and alone in being a Portuguese American, and get them excited and then get them talking to one another. And once they get talking to one another, I think that this could explode. They say these events are awesome. They say this kind of travel's awesome. Maybe then understanding the Portuguese language becomes a cooler thing to have and do. So I would go at them through the things that interest them. I think I mentioned most of them. Believe it or not, they love to read. So poetry events of various cultures that introduce them to Fernando Pessoa and other folks like that, I think could be really good. So again, ending with where I started, go at them through the back door.
Indeed, that's a marketer's experience speaking. Thank you so much, and some very, very interesting and important takes on it. I mean, and very pragmatic, which I think we do need to be with the younger generation, indeed. José Luis, your take on, of course, the presentation by Gonçalo that you have also read, and your take, which is different because Gonçalo is a Portuguese American with the American part of only 6 years, as he put it. Deb is basically third generation, if I'm not mistaken, third to fourth, and Michael is definitely fourth generation. And something that Michael mentioned, which is quite interesting, which when he said that that his wife kind of, although she has Japanese and Portuguese, cultivated that Portuguese, and he didn't as much. And sometimes that happens to us in the first generation. So we just take it for granted. That's who we are, and so our kids are going to be that way, our grandkids are going to be that way, but it's not the case. And so I thought that was very important what Michael said. Sometimes it is the those who are just only part Portuguese who cultivate it, because we take it for granted. It's the way it is. But your take as an immigrant, like myself, and in your case coming over after high school, your take on these concepts and this idea of selling Portugal as an all-inclusive state, and some of these things that are important to young generations, the LGBTQ rights, the drug issue, and the race and ethnicity. So your take on that, because you've been working with young people, not so much in the last few years since you were retired, but 30-some years of your life was with young teenagers.
This is an amazing discussion. I'm really enjoying this. We're dealing here with identity, and identity of country, ethnicity, language, cultures. I'm going to take this a little wider scope. Sorry about my voice, but it's what it is today. I have a little trouble about looking at Portugal as this mother country that everybody has to pay homage to. I think we have a community, a global community, made out of people that are associated with Portuguese culture, but have brought in a lot into this world of Portuguese speakers and of Portuguese culture, Portuguese language. So I would like, for example, here in California, third, fourth Portuguese Americans, when you ask them, what are you? They'll immediately say Portugal, I'm Portuguese, or I'm from Terceira, or from Pico. They'll identify with the nationality and then the specific place they're from, or their family is from. And so there's this general perspective of being Portuguese, very general, but then they go specifically to the birthplace of the parents, and that's the major connection that they have, and they are missing something. And I'm glad that Gonçalo brought this idea. I like that quote from Agostinho Silva. The Portuguese question is not whether or not you speak Portuguese. As a Portuguese teacher, that's what I sell, but I also look at the whole picture. Agostinho Silva said it is a way of being or not being Portuguese. And Agostinho Silva, great philosopher who lived in Brazil many years, he knew that. And I'm going to take it, without being a philosopher or without being imported, I'm going to take it a little further. I think the question is being part of this global Portuguese speaking, but sometimes not speaking, but being part of a culture. There's many layers in here. Some of you may not speak Portuguese, but you have a lot of traditions that are Portuguese. You have an identity that's Portuguese. You are ethnically Portuguese. So we cannot exclude, and we cannot have this umbilical cord to Portugal and pay, as I said, pay homage to the mother country and expect to follow things the way they are. I'll give you an example. Language. When a Portuguese American goes to Portugal and they'll slip, and when they want to say congelar, to freeze, they'll say frisar. People laugh. Oh, they don't know how to speak Portuguese. Well, I heard a very distinguished Portuguese in Portugal using the word frisar relating to computers. So the standards are determined by almost an elite, and I think this is important to take a look at the fact that there are no superior Portuguese to others. We have various layers of being associated with this Portuguese world, often with a language, but often not with a language, and we have to take that in consideration. I there's also, the other side of the story is that yes, we do need to know about all of us, but I think Portugal and the Portuguese people need to learn about the Portuguese associated people, whatever they are. I'm not talking about language in Brazil and Angola and in California, in Hawaii, in other states. We are a vibrant part of that world, but we are not in the same. We are not exactly copies of the Portuguese in Portugal. We may actually have a lot to offer them. As a matter of fact, I'm a little distraught at what happens in Portugal sometimes, where, for example, young people going to Portugal and they say all they play is American music. I'll never forget this years ago when Portugal was playing. No, not Portugal. There was a final of a World Cup a long time ago between Italy and Brazil. And I'm sitting there in Portugal with my cousin, and she's all pulling for Italy. And I said, "Why are you pulling for Italy? I mean, Brazil is a Portuguese-speaking country. They are our people." And it's just because I'm European. And I think that Portuguese have tried so hard to be European. We know that's where the money often comes from, but they try so hard that they often forget that they have much more in common with people from all over the Portuguese language, culture, ethnic, whatever, than they do have with the Europeans. I know, and that's kind of, I'm running against the current here, or swimming against it, but we should look at this global community. That's my final thought. By this global community that is made out of people that has countries in them, Portuguese-speaking countries, has many ethnicities, many races, and there's one language with several variants, like any major language in the world has variants, but it has many cultures, and we need all to embrace this culture. Look, the example of Hawaii. I mean, if you are Portuguese descent in Hawaii, you know better than me the variety of cultures in there. In California, we have a very strong Hispanic component here. So we interact with all this. We're enriched by them. We are not less of this Portuguese community because we are richer by so many things. In Portugal, they're enriching themselves with Europe. Here, we're enriching ourselves with the variety of communities that we are in, and including the traditional Anglo-American community. So my point is, let's not look at this, carrying the Portuguese flag of Portugal. We all have to bow to that. I think that all of us, including Portugal, need to embrace this global community and learn from it and enjoy the variety and richness of all the components.
Indeed, and indeed, and it's kind of going back to our roots of being universais, being people who are, as many people have said, and at one of the Luzo American Education Foundation conferences many years ago in Chino, our good friend, the poet Vasco Pereira da Costa, said, I feel at home in California like I feel like it's in my backyard, because of all these elements that I found of the culture in Coimbra, in California, that I have in Coimbra, in my yard. So this kind of universalist theme to the Portuguese. I mean, that's where the discoveries and everything else came from. With all the baggage, of course, that all that carries. But indeed, so. Thoughts from any of you, and I'll open it to any of you on this idea that have taken this inclusive state and looking at the universal aspect of the Portuguese culture, whether it be through language, cultural ties, culinary experiences, music, etc. Any thoughts on this edition that we've just been that was discussed by José Luis da Silva?
Michael? Yes. Jose, first, just so inspiring. I'm sitting here just so excited. And not to get too academic, but Stuart Hall said that there were two types of cultural identities. One was a cultural identity shared in a unified past and who we were. The other is a cultural identity informed by who we've become. And it raises this larger question, not only about how do we embrace our history and embrace our legacy and embrace our heritage, but how do we bring who we've become to the conversation? How do we celebrate Portuguese in Hawaii, Portuguese in Brazil, and as we've co-evolved and changed over time and been influenced without having to sacrifice our own Portugueseness in the process. And so you just got me thinking about that, and I remembered that kind of Stuart Hall quote, because as I've been exploring Portuguese identity, particularly in Hawaii, the question I keep asking myself is, how has it changed, and where can I find the filaments? Where can I find the connective tissue that has this kind of ingrained identity, but has changed over time and has become richer?
Luis, we hadn't met before. It's a pleasure to meet you. Pleasure to listen to you speak as well. I think you hit the nail on the head. It is a world culture, and it has to be. And I want to touch on a few of the points that you said. You talk about we have a lot to offer Portugal. Absolutely. Portugal's greatest asset might very well be its diaspora and the fact that it is present in the whole world. But I don't think the elite that you also mentioned, I don't think they will let us, because they are not ready to let go of their own sense of elite. It's the paying homage to the motherland happens all across the board. I was just reading the other day. This is Onésimo Titoni de Andrade mentions this. It's the fact that and I'm a bit of a Portuguese history nerd for factoids, so I always pridefully fell into this of saying, oh, Japanese language has 200 words that were inspired by Portuguese language. When we established that trade relationship, we were the first Europeans to establish that trade relationship with Japan. And we say that there's the whole thing, I have it memorized in a place because I know I'm ready to bring it up at any time. He opened my eyes to something really interesting. I have never heard anybody talk about the exact opposite, the influence that Japanese language had in the Portuguese language, which is also very present and very important. The fact that in Portugal we have a tough time accepting things that come in regards to language that I'm talking about at this point. We have a little bit of trouble accepting what comes from the outside. That's why now that, especially since 1974, there's been a bigger merging with the communities of the ex-colonies in Africa. We are getting some terms and some sentences that are used colloquially in Portugal that came from Angola, from Mozambique, from Cape Verde. The old generations don't like it. It's improper. It's not correct to say it. We should beware, which I'm completely against. I want to make sure that I underline, because language is a living thing. It's made by the speaker. You were talking about the frisar. In my research, I found a document with a mini dictionary of Anglicisms that have been made here in California. It was 45 minutes of me just smiling, looking at the paper. I thought it was the best thing ever, because it is that global community, and that's what matters. It's that evolution. Coming back to what Deb was saying as well. I love history. I told you those factoids are important. I hope that my generation also that is a feeling that is shared throughout my whole generation. And there is important history in the traditional traditions of Portuguese American culture in California. That the history shows that progressive mindedness and that openness of Portuguese culture. We talk about festas, which is the first thing that I think anybody will think about as the exponent of putting out Portuguese culture in California. I went to research the history of festas back in the Azores. The men were crowned. Now here in California, we have the Queen of the Festa. When it started 200 years ago, that Portuguese have been here in California, festas have probably been going for over 100. The dresses were very modest, very careful. Now the queens have pride in their big exuberant dresses to show that. So that progression already shows an inclusivity, shows an eye towards the future, that we do want to bring these people, we do want them to express themselves even in their clothing. So I think that talking about these, even what's traditionally traditional, shows these improvements and shows these open-mindedness that Jose, the diaspora has and people here in California have, and all over the United States, that maybe Portugal is not ready yet to open its eyes. We're still, we immediately can say that our word garagem comes from the French garage. French is fancy. But we wouldn't use another word that came from another place. It's that European feeling that you bring up as well.
I think that what's been said is really, really important. I again, because of my training, to be more pragmatic and look at how we do something rather than the philosophical foundation on which it's based. But I think the two marry well here in that looking to the mother country for guidance on how to go forward could be replaced with bringing them forward with us on what needs to be done. And that's why, while I think all of us here today, it's good that we're doing this, I think we need a lot more Gonzalos in these sessions who are younger, who are visionaries for the future, who have years and years ahead of them to make this difference. And I think we need to ask people what they want, what they think. I think that inclusivity will come from that. I think where we should head will come from that. And as we go forward that way, I think you can bring the history in. I ended up with a minor in history without even knowing it, just because like Gonzalo, I love it so much. And it impacts and has influenced everything we do, but it shouldn't be the end all and the be all for who we are and where we go.
The other work that I do besides being a student, I'm also a magician. That's I don't think I had shared this with any of the panelists, but that's the work that I love to do. That's what I hope to do for the rest of my life. And when I'm talking to my colleagues and my friends and we're developing something new, we always have this sentence that we keep in mind: logic and reason after creativity. So creativity needs to come first. So sometimes when we're exploring something and a magical effect, I want to fly. How am I going to do that? Let's worry about it later. First, let's think about flying. And I think that's what we might need to do here, envisioning this community of the future. I wrote down a few things as we were talking. I don't know what these look like. I don't know what they could look like, but that's for me to worry about later. But what could it be? I was thinking about Michael being in Hawaii, and I really love the music of the Pacific all across the islands. I think it's great. It has so much passion. What would Hawaiian folklore look like? Merging traditional Hawaiian music with traditional Portuguese dance. I have no idea, but I would love to get composers in a room to write a song and then dancers to fight. I don't know what that could look like, but that could be something. I also, another history factoid, the day to celebrate Rainha Santa Isabel, the Queen Isabel, is July the 4th. Well, I don't need to say what that date means here in the United States. Her whole thing was giving and making a big community. Well, let's celebrate Rainha Isabel with burgers and hot dogs. There's no rule to say that we can't do that, so let's do it. Let's put logic and reason aside, and let's just create. And whatever comes of it will come of it.
Indeed, the Catherine Vache quote, which is "Let's not be right, let's be amazed," and so it fits exactly what you're saying. So how we get there. Sometimes we worry a little bit too much of how we get there. Let's have the vision, and then and let's make mistakes along the way. But let's try. Let's do it. Indeed, why do we Portuguese Americans? It's such a great point, Gonçalo. Why do Portuguese Americans who are so tied to the idea of festa? I think my friend Luis would agree with that. We are very tied to the idea of festa. We've had, even conversations about, how do we go beyond the festa? Because we are, in order to be this universal community, we have to go beyond the festa. But how do we go beyond the festa? But we were still tied with that idea of festa So why not celebrate the idea festa that became from the Queen on the day of her birthday, which is American independence, with a Portuguese flair, with a universal Portuguese theme, which is Portuguese, but it's universal, the theme of sharing, the theme of empathy, the theme of solidarity, the theme of, some people don't like the word, but I know two words, but I like it, which is social justice. And so why not bring that together with the American spirit of the 4th of July? And so that kind of brings us to the last part of, we have about 15 minutes or so that I'd like to end, and that is going around again. And I know, not to be, repetitive, but there were some themes here that, and Duarte Silva, I believe, is the one that wrote on the chat that just this theme that we're kind of exploring here will be enough for a symposium, and it should be. Give me an idea, like I need another symposium to create, but at the PBBI, but it is something that we need to explore with all of the different ethnicities and all of the different. The fusion of the different ethnicities that we have in the Portuguese American community. And we're going to try to do this through the next 4 days. And we do have a lot of young people on panels as well. And we have actually one on Saturday that's dedicated just to young people. We have 5 young people. And so we have the one this evening that I invite you, which is called Intergenerational Connections. And we have folks that are a little bit more seasoned, not as seasoned as I am, but close to being as seasoned like me, and some as young as Gonçalo's age. So kind of looking, how do we connect those generations and going forward from this discussion here. But there's also that point of how do we move the mother country forward? Maybe we should be, and I wrote that down, and I think it was Deb that mentioned, how do we move the mother country forward? Also because of what Jean-Louis said and of what Gonçalo seconded, and the European feel, and everything else. And so how do we move them, as we go forward ourselves, we are the ones that need to move the mother country forward, even though those elites, I completely agree with all of you, those elites will not, go forward because, that's what elites are supposed to do wherever they're at, they're supposed to stay stationary. But they're doing their job. But it is up to us in the Portuguese American universal world, whether we live in California or Utah or Rio Grande do Sul or Hawaii, or Tahiti, that we bring this idea forward, and we bring the community and the motherland as well. So thinking about that, and we talked about food fairs, and we talked about some of the other events. Are there some thoughts? And Deb brought in, using technology and using these short clips, which is a very good idea, using these short clips of different aspects of whether it be the Portuguese identity or the Portuguese history or the history of the Portuguese universality, bringing all of those together and reaching young people in a different manner than we have been used to in the past. I think the pandemic has taught us that we can do things differently. So any thoughts on that, on taking these ideas that we all just went over with as much detail as we could in a limited amount of time, including this idea of the inclusive state that Gonçalo mentioned, including this idea of talking about things that are important to millennials and to next gens and everything else, which is the LGBTQ issue, which is the drug issue, which is the race and ethnicity. And because we don't discuss these issues, and I think Luis will agree with me, we don't, in the traditional Portuguese American community, these issues are not discussed. I mean, the California Portuguese American Coalition, PBI, discussed them last year because of some of the issues that happened in America, the George Floyd murder, etc. But these issues are not discussed, in the Portuguese American community in an open forum. And so how do we, in order to bring in all these different ethnicities and in these identities, we have to also do that as well. So I know we've had some thoughts on that, but are there any specific things that you would like to see, that you even feel that maybe organizations such as PBBI, I mean, we're a little bit more in the academic world, but we have a connection with the community. We want to continue that connection. So organizations such as PBBI, organizations such as the Luzo American Education Foundation, these organizations that are concerned with culture, identity, with the presence of the Portuguese American community in California and throughout the United States and Canada. How do we move forward on this? Because I do think that, especially in California, we are at a crossroads, and we either salvage what we have, or the community, we will lose some of the things that Gonçalo said. Some of the things that had their natural evolution, where you go from the imperador having the crown on his head to a rainha, which is actually taking a different concept and giving the queen the big lead in the festa, and not the imperadors that came from the past. So actually mixing in a little bit of more of a presence of of women in the festa itself. So how do we take all of these and expound in some pragmatic ways to bring all of this discussion to a little bit of a fruition in the aspect of connecting and making these connections with the younger generation of Gonçalo's generation, but also the older generation, or the more seasoned, I shouldn't say older, but the more seasoned generation of myself and those of us, I won't name names on the panel, but the rest of us basically, that I believe also need this connection, because we have not concentrated in the Portuguese American world, especially we've concentrated a lot on immigrant community, but we have not concentrated on second, third, and fourth generation. Okay, and so I meet people through PPBI just about every week that are of third generation, especially was their grandparents, or fourth generation was their grandparents that immigrated, and they want to be part of this community, but there isn't a space for them. The space itself has been more created for the immigrant community. So thoughts on that, and any suggestions as we kind of take a final round from everyone. And anyone can start that would like to. I'm not going to be authoritative, although I can be.
Well, I'll start. I'll be general. I don't have any particular suggestion for events, because I think that's something for the new generation to come up with. Just a general idea is that our community has been extremely good at tradition. We have maintained tradition through our Holy Ghost celebrations, through our organizations. We have been one of the strongest, at least in California, one of the strongest communities at maintaining our tradition, with some imagination, but with very little imagination. I think we are missing imagination, because our intent was to recreate the past, or recreate the way it used to be, to make us all feel good in this world of saudade for what we used to be. So I think that the challenge for the young generation, Gonçalo and people of his age, is let your imagination fly. I love that combination of tradition and imagination, and the example you gave, the July 4th with the Rainha San Isabel. That is a tradition, and then creating from that a work of art. And I think in some ways, we need to have imaginative ways to connect the world, and not to approach this from an inferiority thing, like we are, we're not as good as somewhere else. No, we are all very, very, very important in this general Lusophone world.
Denise mentioned having possibly an organization like PBBI get involved in some way. If there were an opportunity to put out a call to young artists of whatever type, whether that's musical artists or videographers or bloggers, you name it, and and develop a theme. And I don't know exactly what that theme would be right now, but something about Portugal as it is today, as a varied countries, learning about different places, learning what it means to people to be Portuguese, and maybe have some sort of a contest where they end up putting together a 2 or 3 minute little video, and those get shown not just in the circles I might go look for them, but in places where they go look for them. If you could get social media kids savvy kids, which most of them are, to be influencers and put stuff out there, because what they love to do is spread the word. So we can get something that's really interesting, and then they start telling one another. But starting with what is it that might interest them, and I don't have the answer to that. You could probably tap into a lot of your students' niche, and what do they think would be really interesting to know. That's one thought I have as of now.
It's a great idea.
I think we're talking about really having a cross-generational and transcultural engagement. That type of engagement needs to be rich, and some of that is really about capturing. So, for instance, Gonzalo was asking or said, what would Polynesian or Pacific music sound like as influenced by the Portuguese? The irony is, of course, almost all Hawaiian music is influenced by the Portuguese, not just because of the ukulele, but because of the people who play it. Kelly Boy de Lima was the lead singer of Kalapana, Roland and Robert Casimiro from the Casimiro Brothers, and of course Jerry Santos from Olomana. You find Portuguese people all over the music industry. And if you listen to a lot of fado, you can hear the musical influences, but they're not constrained because they're mutually informing. And so the music becomes incredibly rich and cross-cultural. But the other thing that came up for me is there's an interesting phenomenon, and Denise and I talked about this a little bit recently, of isolation. So our immigration ended in 1913. Portuguese immigration to Hawaii essentially ended in 1913. And so you have a group of people who have identified as Portuguese, who are fourth generation minimum by definition in most instances. But what happens is, for instance, we know that genetic adaptations, that there is as much diversity within a group as there is between groups. An interesting thing about that isolation is that many of the cultural practices that were brought here in the late 1800s are still known. There's still an imaginary going on. There's still, like I was asking Denise about in the Azores about a phenomena of visiting the bush lady. In Hawaii, we call it the bush lady. The bush lady was a healer of sorts, and you would go to the bush lady when you were sick. Well, I did some research and I found out that turned stomach in Portuguese is bucho varado, something like that. But you would go see that person, and I took my own daughter to a Portuguese healer. And so what's interesting about that is that that's something that I think this next generation that Deb was talking about, or the generations Deb was talking about, I think they're curious too. I think they're incredibly curious and want to know about those things. And I think that generation that would be able to pass on that information, I think they're just as curious about where their Portuguese identity is going. And so I think if we can get that cross-generational and transcultural gathering together, I think that's the wave, that's the move that needs to be made. And I'm so excited about the ideas that have been shared amongst this panel, and I wish, frankly, it was a larger panel discussion. I'm excited to hear from others on what their thoughts are.
Indeed, it's a good point. I'm glad you brought up the story of the bush lady and your research on that. Bucho, our word, for bucho, estômago, barriga, and so that's where the idea comes from. Because, as Michael said, in that thought, everything, and explain that to us, everything comes from the abdomen and not really from the head. Correct?
Yeah, and interesting, there was a psychoanalytic analysis of the different ethnic groups, and they talked about how Portuguese manifested their ailments in the stomach quite often. But also in Hawaiian culture, the na'au is a wisdom center, and that wisdom center is in your gut, not in your head. And it just got me thinking of the different ways these paths cross culturally, the ideas and notions of what it is to be Portuguese, but also what it is to be Hawaiian, to be Japanese, to Chinese, etc.
Sure, indeed. And I think we're just about out of time. I had promised you about an hour, and we started a little bit before 11, so we're right at 12 o'clock. And I know that a very nice comment from Melissa, who is those of you following us, who is a writer and who's going to be on our panel on Friday, a Portuguese-American writer, who lives here in Central Valley, who actually works at Fresno State, and who we hope to have quite a few future projects with. Which sometimes we kind of forget about that. In our own backyard, sometimes there are people that, because we're so tied to what José Luis said, sometimes a lack of imagination, because we're so tied to some of the traditional things that we've done that we forget that, for example, 3 of the writers we'll have on Friday's panel are product of the Master of Fine Arts program at Fresno State, and they're Portuguese American. One of them, of course, Melissa does not have a very Portuguese name, but it's just the same thing with Deb, which I'm going to call her Martins from now on. But it's and so that happens. So first and foremost, thanks to all of you, and thank you all those of you following us for the wonderful comments. We appreciate it, and those on Facebook as well. Thanks to all of you, this igniting panel. Thanks to Gonçalo for the presentation in the panel. Thanks to Deb. Thanks to José Luis, and thanks to Michael. I would like to end with, because of Gonçalo's inspiration, with a poem. It's not mine. I wish I wrote poetry as good as José Luis does, but I've written poetry, and then when I go to translate some of the poems, I look back at what I've written, I throw mine in the trash, and I'm glad I did. And so this one is from a good friend of some of us that are here, and hopefully a friend of all of you as when you read his poem. It's Vasco Pereira da Costa, originally from the island of Terceira, but lives in mainland Portugal, was a teacher and a cultural activist in Coimbra for many, many years. And it's called Artesia's Patron. And so it's a translation of a poem from Portuguese that has actually some words in English, but this is the full translation. And it kind of goes in the line of what we're saying and what we've been talking about. And so here's the poem from Vasco Pereira da Costa, Artesia, for those of you in the Portuguese American community who know it well. For those of you who don't, following us, it's a community in Southern California, very Portuguese, with a strong Portuguese presence in the LA area. And it says, I know that times have changed, Queen Isabel, and that California is a land of plenty, of roses and oranges and sons of honey. Your prodigies of saint may not seem useful. But in the middle of this prodigality, there are people who suffer in the American way, some necessity, suffering the poor man's hunger that the social sciences call socially excluded. Therefore, liberal saintly queen, leave your altar, take the freeway, visit the most hidden of LA, leave Artesia in search of the sublime rose, and even if you don't find the king, transform the rose in the American way into hamburgers, hot dogs, enchiladas, and ice cream. And so I think it's a way to embrace the 4th of July with our tradition of the Queen, and it's wonderful to see this creativity also in our communities that embraces the universality of the Portuguese culture. So thank you all. Thank you so much. The Luzo American Education Foundation Conference will continue at 2 o'clock. Just a brief info session here for everyone. So the Luzo American Education Foundation Conference will continue at 2 o'clock.
Stopped.
And at 2 o'clock, we're going to have a presentation in Portuguese. It will be in the same theme. We're discussing the Portuguese communities, and it's called A Nossa Diáspora nos Estados Unidos da América e Canadá, Reflexão, Desafios e Oportunidades. We have representation from Canada, Connecticut, California, and Florida. And then at 5 o'clock, the Intergenerational Connections, the Portuguese Experience in North America. Again, a panel with Sara Vieira, Linda Carvalho Cooley, Esmeralda Cabral, Matthew Correia, and Tisha Cardoza. So join us today, if you can, at 2 and at 5. Those are Pacific times. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you in the next session. And thanks again to this wonderful panel.
Thank you, Denise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon.
Take care.
Adeus. Muito obrigado. Adeus.